here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish International. I'm your host, Darren Mooney, and joining me are...
Jay.
Grace.
And Ronan.
Jesus.
Grace Jesus, one of the greats.
Also, may need to move Mike a little bit.
Sorry, I made way for the treats.
But yes, so we're going to talk about what we normally talk about on this podcast, which includes the top 10, the new releases, and the weekend film news. But let's talk about what we usually do first, which is what have we watched since last we talked? Ronan?
It's been quite a while. I have been away for some time from this podcast. I haven't been away. I've just been hanging around. I've mostly been at films during our recording time.
The IFI season.
Yeah, so there's been an IFI season on perspectives of Northern Ireland, especially perspectives shot by people from outside Northern Ireland. This was curated by Donal Foreman, the friend of the show, director of The Image You Missed, which was...
Long-term listener.
Long-term listener.
Zero-time caller.
He directed The Image You Missed last year, which was, I think, wound up in the collective Scannain top 10.
Is it my top 3?
Yeah, absolutely terrific film.
I think around 6 or 7, which is quite good.
Yeah, fantastic sort of interrogation of the idea of identity as it applies to artistry and nationality. That played as part of the season, along with his father, Art McCaig's film Irish Ways. I didn't go to that one because I had seen both of those previously and have talked about them previously on the podcast. But I did go to absolutely everything else, and it was a really, really good season. Just really fascinating perspectives and things that are difficult to come across for the most part. So kudos to the IFI for actually presenting these things. And in the context of now what's going on in Northern Ireland, sort of political deadlock, kind of anniversaries, it's really, really good to see. And the sort of the way a lot of these things have resonance with the present is really fascinating. It's kind of the crux of good programming. This has been possibly the strongest season they've done since I've been going to the IFI. Essentially, it's,
wow,
it's that perfect combination of
sorry, someone may throw. Sorry, Ron.
It's that perfect combination of stuff you otherwise wouldn't have the chance to see.
Indeed. No, I completely agree.
And just the context they bring in conversation with each other, that is really absolutely invaluable. A couple of highlights: The Black and the Green, a really, really interesting documentary about a bunch of black activists from America who came to Northern Ireland to get to grips with the cause they very much followed in the philosophy of Martin Luther King of complete non-violence. And there's a really strange moment near the end of it where one of them sort of says, I'm beginning to understand why people turn to violence. And this is somebody who throughout the film advocates, never, ever, ever in any way turning to violence. It's a really interesting, slow turn that happens throughout. A lot of the films, I should say, are generally sympathetic to a nationalist point of view. Which I think in some cases is less a political judgment than just empathy with the oppressed.
Yeah, it's a humanitarian thing to a lot of degrees. I mean, regardless of, there are a both side argument, but I think there's one side that's heavily stacked in favour of the other in the context of army and various. I think that's generally filmmakers will come from that perspective.
And it's very much standing in solidarity with the downtrodden. There were a lot of really, really interesting films in there. It closed with A Sense of Loss, which is this French documentary. It was about 2.5 hours long, and the perfect cap for the season, I have to say, directed by a guy called Marcel Ophuls, who appears very much as a character in that sort of Herzogian style of documentary.
Is he an Ophuls of the Ophuls?
I don't think he's related to Max.
Ah, okay. I'm curious.
I haven't seen any of his work, but I think he did The Sorrow and the Pity. I haven't seen that. He takes a very active role in this documentary where he very actively queries all of the people he's talking to, saying, why do you believe that? That isn't backed up by stats. What do you think about these people who are dying in the streets? That kind of thing. And it's fascinating for it because you often don't see that. You see a straight interview that doesn't have any kind of interjection by anyone saying, I'm going to challenge you on
people
that.
Get to say what their spiel.
Well, the soapbox, yeah.
And this is a really, really holistic portrait in that he talks to a Protestant whose mother was murdered, a week before, that kind of thing. It's really, really fascinating for the access he gets as well. There are interviews with Jack Lynch and Noel Brown in here.
They're major figures.
Yeah. Jack Lynch Taoiseach at the time.
Yeah.
And I think the maybe the Home Secretary in the UK at the time is in there as well. It's really holistic in that sense that it's got those. It's also got the widow of an IRA fighter who died the previous week. Really, really fascinating. And although it has nationalist sympathies, it's also really interrogating nationalism throughout, questioning the idea of what is this that we are striving towards, what are we trying to build, who is it for, who does it include, and indeed who does it exclude, which takes me to Maeve, which was one of the earliest films in the season I saw with Jay, and was a complete revelation.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Directed by Pat Murphy, and the only fiction film in the series, but completely fit within it. It's just fantastic, a work of feminism that interrogates the idea again of nationalism, asking what is the good of striving for a free Ireland if the women in this Ireland afterwards will not be free, which is so prescient.
And particularly in Northern Ireland, in terms of we're part of the UK, but we don't have the abortion laws of the UK.
We're very conservative, even by the standards.
And that's major.
This island.
This was, I think, Maeve was 84.
Early 80s,
yeah. And remarkably prescient. And it felt like, I saw, as Rona mentioned, we saw it together, and I felt it one of the best Irish films ever made.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that way that you've watching something special and you're very aware you're watching something special.
And a national treasure we should really be celebrating. A really fascinating film and great performances throughout. It's absolutely a treasure. One of the highlights of this season for me, because it felt like such a discovery. And I think it's available. It's streaming on the BFI website?
Yes. This is one of these things, and we've talked before that if this was the BFI or somewhere else, there might be a box set released of this season to kind of celebrate that kind of thing, so everybody can have an access kind of thing. We know that the IFI don't have that budget, and whoever are in charge of the rights or whatever aren't coming together to do that kind of thing. But again, it's worth mentioning that something like that would be extremely welcome in the context of a series, because these films are important and they speak to now more so than anything.
I was also caught up at the IFI likewise with the East Asia Film Festival, which showed a whole host of films from across the region, but the real highlight there was a retrospective of Tsai Ming-liang films with him in attendance. Really fascinating, because I hadn't actually seen any of the films yet. I know Stray Dogs from a couple of years back, maybe 2013, made a bit of a splash and kind of catapulted him into the, as it were, mainstream of the art house. He had to put up with some very weird Q&As while we were here, but it was...
as is traditional.
As is traditional,
Rite of passage.
Indeed. It's not necessarily an Irish thing, but great to catch a lot of his films. The River was the real standout for me, just this really strange, odd thing about a character who is trying to deal with a mysterious pain in his neck and visiting all these sort of Buddhist spiritualists, not quite able to get an answer, but it touches on ideas of family, loneliness, trying to connect with other people in a modern society. Really, really great. And the only other thing I will mention... Oh, sorry, no, there's Varda.
There's always Varda.
I rewatched Le Bonheur, which we had watched last year, Jay and
I
think we both said that it was immediately a film that we wanted to rewatch.
Yes, because the first half does a thing that you kind of like, and then the second half does a thing that makes you question the first half.
Turns absolutely everything in its head. So I'd been looking to revisit this for a very, very long time, and I finally got around to it. And it is fascinating to see it with that kind of hindsight context, knowing where it's
I imagine it's a much richer experience.
The foreshadowing. But in a way, it's not that revealing in that it's all there the first time. There is the sense when you're, when the kind of thing happens that you've been, your hand has been held and you've been led there the whole time. I love the fact that this is Varda's first colour feature, and it is so beautifully coloured. The sort of autumnal pastels of it. It is absolutely
It feels timeless
gorgeous.
in that way, like in a kind of fairy tale almost kind of colours.
Yeah. It exists in a very specific context, yet it feels like it's speaking for the relationship between men and women from the start of time. It's fantastic. And I also watched the first time Varda, the so-called Caryatids, which is a short documentary about these little statues that just appear in Paris, have no real function other than adding decoration to a building. It's this lovely sense of, making things look beautiful for the sake of it. And it's that kind of thing that she does best. I think somebody said my favourite Letterboxd review that I came across was Agnés Varda, Queen of Noticing Things. it's exactly that she just wanders the street and goes,
should I make a film about this?
I'll make a film about that. And what does that say about us as a species? She's just so good at that. This is lovely. And
I really liked it. There's a gentle kind of gender norming kind of exploration about like the male statues and what they represent.
And holding up and seeming strong and powerful, the presentation of the male body and
and
such.
then old ladies shaking out carpets or whatever in the middle of two statues, like, because she loves that kind of incidental people.
And people like craning off their balcony
Yeah,
to
yeah.
brush the statues with the broom because this is my home and I'm going to keep it nice, of course.
So there's lots of little incidental details like that are always fantastic. Like,
and one final thing I'll mention, because I've been waiting weeks to do this. I watched Under the Silver Lake, and it is
fuck's sake,
bobbins.
It's not
bobbins. It's no good. There have been some really fascinating things I've seen on Twitter of people like interrogating the coded signs in it and how it's sort of playing this really interesting game of gesturing towards conspiracy theories while pretty much dragging people who believe in that. And I absolutely think that's true, but it's also about 2.5 hours long and couldn't hold me for even 15 minutes of that.
Also quite, for me, and I know Jay quite liked it, but
it's
for
in my
me
top 10 of the year at the moment. I'm going to point out.
It's early in the year.
It's not really. But yeah, no, it was it seemed very superficial in its handling of conspiracy theory. Whereas conspiracy theory was, hey, people are trying to make sense of the universe, and conspiracy theory allows you to do that. And it's like, yes, and
It's almost dismissive in a way, yeah.
Yeah, no, but like, it's not dismissive. It is what it is. But it's like, you've got 2.5 hours. We've been talking about conspiracy theories for the better part of 4 decades.
Yeah.
This is your A game. Now there are scenes that like
it's aware of history of Californian conspiracies. Like, it's not coming in blind. It's not. This isn't an idiot kind of going, hang on, I'm the first guy to make it. Like, there's an awareness of history.
It's got some very, very self-aware film references and everything in it.
Yeah. And I mean, there are bits that I like. I particularly like the weird musical sequence and the sort of climaxy bit of it, which I quite like.
I really like that. It's an odd fish.
Why is there a musical sequence in it?
It's actually really
goodness.
It's one of the most indulgent things in the film, but somehow one of those things that I love the most.
Because it's unexpected.
It's an incredibly wanky film in a very literal and metaphorical sense.
It is.
Rewarding you for getting that far, probably.
But I like
have some dancing people.
There's no dancing.
I found it quite sad as a film. Like, I like Garfield's performance in this. I think he's really, really good in it. Like, and there's this kind of weird sadness to it that kind of gets emphasized the longer it goes on. And the longer goes on is a deliberate thing, I think, as well, in terms of this never-ending kind of labyrinthine kind of search for meaning in something. Searching for meaning in meaninglessness. Like, of this kind of, how can I find some sort of meaning to my life? And indulgent in that way, and there is an indulgence in that, but there's indulgence in the filmmaking. I agree also, but I think it works really well. And listen, I'm aware I'm in the minority of this, but I'm not on my own. There's quite a few people that like it.
No, absolutely not.
You don't have to justify it.
I'm not justifying it, although I am.
But no, there was.
I can see why people think it's bobbins. I do, and I can know exactly where they're coming from.
I mean, without
they're wrong, but I can know where they're coming from.
Without being mean, it seemed very much like every mid-20-something man's film.
Well, I'm not mid-20s, Darren.
I put it hard, Jay.
So you can give it a sort of a revisionist take that everyone else can get to when they're older.
But I think it is a revisionist take in that regard. I do think that what's his face director is such and such.
David Robert Mitchell.
David Robert Mitchell. I knew it was a Mitchell. I couldn't remember. And it's Jim Barrow. But I think he's very aware of that kind of younger guy's kind of search for meaning. And and I think I've seen Letterboxd reviews which I think are spot on. Whereas poor women that are going to have to listen to the next decade of listening to guys at parties telling how this is an amazing film.
Have you ever seen Under the Silver Lake?
Darren said that as well, and he's right, and that's true, and that's appalling, and all the rest of it. But I still think there's something in that.
Because if somebody brings it up, you can just be like, "Look what's over there." Okay, bye.
Yeah.
But I like it. I don't want to be that guy, and I'm not that guy. But
the bit where you add the butt at the
that
end,
guy running after me at the party, going,
Grace, you don't even understand.
You just don't get it. Also, can I ask, what is this actually about? Or what does
it's a literal Shaggy Dog story.
It's very much, there's a recurring subplot involved the murdering of Shaggy dogs.
Which you wouldn't be a fan of in that regard.
But it's
you don't see anything.
No, you don't.
Well, it's implied at a certain point.
But anyway,
it's a young man who's lost and adrift in a world without meaning, trying to make sense of it all.
He can't meet his rent.
Yeah.
There are sexy women. He follows them.
He's a creep, though, and I think it's quite clear he's a creep.
Yes, yeah. No, the film is not in any way like.
And in the 70s, this would be like the guy that's the hero. Yeah, and it's not it's quite clear from early on.
But he's also a creep who's has no trouble hooking up with beautiful women, despite
what creep doesn't, Darren?
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There's articles and things devoted to
This- yeah, but
creeps that are
this is
creeps.
it.
Like, you know, their success rate because they're arseholes.
This is the
But prey on
ironic
women
thing.
that
Whenever
are-
people refer to like these crazy, like incels living in basements, I'm like, there are plenty of assholes out there who are like fucking
But
Casanova.
that's exactly what I'm talking about. But they're right. I know people that have been very
How do
successful
you
in that
think
way.
Ted
as
Bundy
arseholes.
got away with it
Indeed.
for so long?
Ted Bundy didn't look like Andrew Garfield in this film. Is the point?
Andrew Garfield looks okay though. He's not.
Andrew
He's not Ted
Garfield
Bundy,
is-
but
I
he's
know,
he's doing okay.
I
like.
know, but the visual shorthand the film is using is that he might as well be, I don't know, Paul Giamatti.
No,
Well, then why didn't they
No, I don't
cast
think
Paul
so.
Giamatti?
I think that's a little. No.
Okay, and the louch and the slouching.
No,
and
he's
the-
To a certain extent, I think that's more
as much as you can make Andrew Garfield.
It's exactly that. If the film is going for that, I don't think it's working.
No, I think it's going for
Andrew
a.
with his looks ruining everything.
He's mentally younger
Really
than
sad.
he is. Like he's
Yeah.
and again that kind of, and I think it's interrogating this a bit, that he's this younger. He's a guy that hasn't really grown up.
Twerp.
Despite he absolutely is, but
Because the
but
world
really
is filled with
Because-
them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I like that aspect of
Me
it. That
too,
it's
and I
engaging
like-
with the way that a lot of men are now.
Yes, and I think the film works that way. I think it'll grow in stature as years go by. We shall see. Maybe I'll hate him and release it 5 years from now. I don't know, but
When
I
we're
really,
living in
really
our
like.
bunker after the apocalypse with our
Yes,
primitive
Grace,
white
and we'll watch it.
be
It's
like,
the only
"Give
movie
us
we
a
have, Grace."
steak."
And funnily
Let's
enough,
do
it would
this
probably
overlay.
speak to that moment quite well.
Yeah, I think so.
That thing you just said
Standing
about
at the door with a hatchet.
in the 70s this guy would have been the hero. I'm thinking of things like The Long Goodbye, which this explicitly references, where he wasn't. We were already
No,
undercutting the idea
but
of him as the
that's
hero.
the only
It
one
would-
that is, though,
Yes,
in relative terms.
But
like.
it's like we're 45 years on from that, and I feel like we've done this. Other films have done this better, so there's nothing in
And
here
I've done
that...
it in less than 2.5 hours. I mean, it's really weird. No, it's weird. I'm normally the guy on the podcast who's like, take as long as you want to tell the story that you tell, and I will judge you for it. And before the film was out, Jay was like, it's 2.5 hours long. Who the fuck is going to watch
I
that?
know, right?
And I was
Jay?
like, I'll sit down and I'll watch it and I'll judge it on its own merits. It's ironic that our position has come around to.
But I
Jay's
will
like,
say though, it's distrust. People look at me with distrust and say, "I'll judge something on its own merits." And it's like, I did. I surprised them much I liked it. Like I thought I was going to hate it. I was like, "Fucking, I'll watch it under sufferance."
Yeah.
And I
20 minutes in, you're like, oh no.
and I was like,
strange
"Shit,
creeping
I'm gonna have to
feeling.
go to
I
bat
only
for this for
had-
the next 10 weeks."
I had my bitchy review.
Yeah, right. I
composed,
had to delete it.
And now I have to go.
I had to go. I'm going to bat for it forever now. Jesus, I'm that guy.
That's your sentence for life.
Now I'm an incel. For fuck's sake, this is not where I position myself in life, lads. I'm 43. I'm too old to be an incel. Anyway, come on.
So thank you for that, Ronan. I really appreciated that. That was.
I'm not just the
I quite
audience. I am
enjoy-
not an
I
incel
quite
because they're
enjoy
arseholes.
the sort of like springboard discussion that we had there. But I think we might ask Grace, what have you watched since last we talked?
Something less
Well-
controversial, Grace.
Yes, I have watched something less controversial. I watched, can I get a wee drum roll, please? I watched my first Varda.
Sorry, I'm very happy.
Brilliant. I watched Faces Places, which in French is called Visage Village, which
Wonderful.
makes
And
me
she keeps saying
incredibly
it. It's amazing
happy.
when she says it.
Oh, I just love French. I love listening to it. I love watching them amble around the French countryside, meeting French people when everything is impossibly quaint. It's just
It is.
not fair.
Singing songs in their little van together. Oh.
And the van with the giant camera on it, I was just like, I can't
want
cope
that
with
van.
this.
I want that van.
It's like, it's so whimsical,
Yeah.
but not so at the same time. No, this was a really charming, sweet story, and I don't know if it's maybe a bit simplistic to say that it's a nice way of sort of probing under the surface of people's lives and people's realities without doing it in a very, what's the word, obnoxious or pretentious way. Like
And it's
it's
not trying to be deep.
yeah, it was just a really nice exploration of just meeting people and hearing stories and learning a bit more about them, and done in this really kind of sweet, endearing way where they just ask people if they can take their pictures and project them up onto a building, which is a really nice way of sort of capturing, I suppose, the enormity of everyone's inner story.
Yeah.
Because, like, everyone they come across, their story, their reality, that's their whole life. And then when you actually blow it up to that size, you give it the same weight that it has for them in their head. But I really liked it as this nice little study of the different lifestyles that people have too, and how simplistic some of them are, and how some of them are changing. Like when she met the farmer who was tilling his land alone, and he said a few years ago there would have been loads of us doing this, and now the tractor.
Changing the face of France, like.
Yeah, I'm like the passenger in this tractor. I don't actually control anything
this
in it,
is
which I
automated.
think, but it's something that resonates with people, and I think it's a really subtle way of looking at the impact that has on people's lives and people's
I'd agree. It's a
everyday
gentle
experiences.
interrogation in that
Yeah.
regard, like.
Without being very like, oh, everything is dying and so on. Except for like the rather bittersweet moment at the end where they were going to see
Jean-Luc Godard.
I was going to say what's his
That
name?
dirty rat.
That dirty rat.
And that was just very mean-spirited and really stood out against the rest of the film. I was like, well, obviously it's Godard. So I'm kind of like, of course he was being a bit of a prick.
Okay.
Waiting for
But
Godard.
Even so, that was a little mean. That
It's
kind
really
of took me
interesting.
out of it towards
It was
the
my
end.
first Varda that I watched as well. And
Cat.
to my
Also cat.
so many cats. She's like they're everywhere in every film. But
There should be cats in everything.
There are in hers if you kind of follow. They're
Recurring
everywhere.
motif, yeah.
Beautiful.
But I thought, like, similar to you, I thought it was that kind of nice kind of thing. But then I watched more of her films, like, shit, she's not like that at all. This is there's a much more darker, introspective kind of sadness to a lot of her films. And when she was younger, obviously, you've more kind of fire in your belly, I guess, and more time.
You've
and
more
all
energy.
and more energy, yeah.
When you get old, you're just
it's
very
really,
tired.
It's really marked to see that, and because I came back to the film because I watched it with my wife after she died. She'd never seen it, and I agree
anyway.
that Varda is perhaps my favorite filmmaker ever now. Like in the way that
It's really shot up there.
in a way that was unexpected and really
He-Man,
strange.
yes.
Yeah, and like I've watched, I think it's about 20 films out of 55, 21 films out of 55, I think. And the humanity, the awareness of self, and kind of clearness of her own thesis of what she wants, how she sees the world, what she wants to investigate, what she wants to interrogate, is never less than fascinating. Even on stuff that doesn't quite work. And there's like, I don't mean quite work as in a 3-star film,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Which is the
a
lowest
stinker.
she's ever
Like
done.
that's the lowest
Yeah.
I've hit. And it's remarkable to me to revisit. And like I said, my wife watched it, so she'd never seen a Varda film before. We watched Space, and she really, really liked it. And I watched it
It's
thinking,
very
this is a different
accessible,
film
alright,
second time
yeah.
round, though.
Yeah.
It's
I think it's a good entry point.
I think so. I think it's a great one, and Netflix
it's on
have it
Netflix
as well.
as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big draw in that regard. Like, that anybody can watch it. Literally,
I know a lot of people whose first Varda it was, mostly because of my crusading, and
Oh yeah, I bang on tell you about it.
yeah. But it's a very nice entry point. And as you say, it's a case where maybe she had more of a fire in her belly in youth. But it's also an interesting case of refining your process over as many decades as she had. You realise that the soft touch is sometimes the way to go. Yeah. It reminds me of that thing with Herzog, where in the execution documentary where he says to someone, describe an encounter with a squirrel,
yeah.
and he ends up breaking down in tears and talking about death and the horribleness of the universe.
That you can just get in there a little differently.
You just find a chink in somebody's armour, and I think Varda is very good with that, and exactly what you're saying, Grace, about the idea of blowing people up to the size of their own image of themselves.
And
It's
showing
so
people as
beautifully good
tall
at that.
and good,
Yeah,
to understand themselves that
That-
we're more than just the thing that we
Yeah.
think we are. Like
The
which
image
I
of
think
those
is-
women on the crates is almost
I
indescribably
was going
moving.
to say that the women at the end, and one of them was saying like, I'm afraid of being alone and I'm afraid of heights. So when I'm
Yeah.
sitting here, I'm like facing my two worst fears.
Yeah.
And also I think it's Varda herself says this in the narration, but she says like they're literally sitting within their own hearts.
Yeah,
The way that
It's
they're
wonderful.
projected, and I was
I
just
think I
like,
did a
oh
little
my
tear
God.
when I watched it the first
Yeah.
time. Like,
But yeah, no, that was lovely. And I think especially that last vignette in the docs kind of captures this really lovely, soft, earthy femininity in the middle of
Yes.
a landscape that's very industrial and
Yes.
coded very male a lot
Yep.
of the time. So that was just a really
And even the guys there
Sweet
were kind
touch.
of not shamed, but certainly kind of being made aware that this is not necessarily your world in that way.
yeah.
You
Well, it's
don't
not
own
only
it.
your
No,
world.
it's not only your world.
Exactly.
Exactly that, and I think that's really important and really interesting.
And I love how we get there. It's that Varda is just like, yeah, hello, where are the women? She's just straight to
Yeah.
it.
It's only a femme. Yeah.
She's the greatest.
She's
and we'll not
lovely.
see anything like her again, I don't think.
We will not.
I mentioned before that like she's one of the few filmmakers that has like 55 films. There's practically none that have it. So you can spend years watching her films because they're one of the few filmmakers that has years of films.
You're not going to run out of them
Tragically,
anytime
but
soon.
wonderfully.
Yeah. Okay, then what did I watch? Oh yes, I watched Colossal over the weekend, the Anne Hathaway movie, which I really enjoyed. This
It's pretty good, isn't it?
This was very interesting because the premise is one that seems incredibly daft. The whole idea that she has some sort of she's able to astral project herself, I suppose, into some kind of massive,
kaiju.
like, monster in Seoul, of all places. But I thought it was a really interesting way of just exploring her as a character and her insecurities and her doubts. And then, of course, as the story progresses, the whole idea of domestic violence and male entitlement and everything that goes along with that. And I have to say, I feel like Jason Sudeikis, not sure how to say his name anyway, I think he was really creepy. When he started to lose it, he really freaked me out. Like, I got quite unsettled.
He was quite
and I
from the
started
outset. He was very good at playing like a
but
subtly
in that,
abusive.
you know, I've heard other people say this about Jason Bateman. I think that there's something a bit unnerving about him. Well, I was having that moment watching him, just going, just not really comfortable with this. But I think there's a moment in particular when it feels like the film, if it's been kind of maybe dancing around that aspect of it up until then, it just sort of switches, and he switches really abruptly, and it just gets so unsettling. Like, it really sort of descends on you out of nowhere.
No, I'd agree.
But
it's
I
a fascinating
like
film in that regard.
Yeah, and like, maybe in that sense the story could be seen as a little bit simple, but I think it was a very interesting way of looking at all of this, and I really, really love the last shot. Like, I'm going to say what it is, so if you haven't seen it, stop listening now. But basically, she manages to thwart him in a very satisfactory way. And then she basically goes in and sits down in a bar in Seoul, and somebody's like to her, you know, so who are you? What's your plan? And she kind of just sighs, which I just really like as this kind of acknowledgement that catharsis does not equal direction. So just because you're like, oh, I've overcome this kind of niggling doubt at my core, but I still have no effing clue what to do with myself. It was just really, I don't know, it felt very human or something. And yes, she's very good in it, but she's very good in everything.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I don't know why people are so mean to her. So yeah, Colossal, good, recommended. And then last night I watched Knock Down the House. I keep going to call it Take AOC, Back the House for some reason. Which was very good in the sense that it was very uplifting, a real kind of like almost fairy tale story.
This is the Netflix documentary looking at a number of progressive campaigns, including AOC's.
Primarily, yes, AOC's, but it kind of very briefly touches on 3 other women candidates who ran in, I think, West Virginia, Missouri, and Nevada, if memory serves. So AOC kind of takes over this documentary. I mean, not she specifically, the filmmaker, obviously, kind of, which in hindsight, it's obvious why, because she's the only one who actually got elected in the end. So, also, and she's also incredibly, she's very charismatic. She has a lot of presence. She has a lot of spirit. And it's very clear why people were drawn to her campaign in that sense. And I really enjoyed watching it from that perspective. Like, I found her a very inspirational figure, and it's the type of story that fills you with a lot of hope, especially right now when it's so easy to be so completely disillusioned with politics. But I did think it was a real shame that there wasn't the same level of attention or introspection given to the other female candidates.
I wonder if that was in the edit.
But that's my point. I'm because I don't feel like they spent less time with them. But I feel like they've consciously edited it to make it more.
I can understand why, though.
Yeah, like I know it's understandable.
I take the point. That could have been 3 or 4 parts.
I do think it would have made it more of a satisfying experience overall if they could have delved even a little bit underneath the surface to get an idea of the substance of their campaigns, their strategies. Because when it shows so little of them overall, then when they're inevitably defeated, it just feels a bit impact. It feels a bit lackluster. You know, it feels kind of inevitable, and it doesn't move you, I think, in the way that it should. Like, it doesn't focus your attention on the powers that be and the way that political system is set up to strangulate progress in that way. So that is a bit of a shame, but still, it's something that I found to be very cheering. And I think that's a nice thing to have with the politics in the world being the way that it is.
And they did talk about this. There's a wonderful issue with the filmmakers on Vulture where they're talking about how, as far as they were concerned, it was going to be a tragedy. Like, when they were shooting it, their opinion was that this is probably going to be a tragedy. And so they were amazed when they got to the end, so to speak, and they were like, well, we actually have a way to construct a triumphant affirmative narrative out of this at a time when people need, as Grace pointed out, an affirmative triumphant narrative.
I will point out, though, that in the week of where a lot of conversations go around spoiler culture, I didn't know that most of them hadn't been elected. But thanks for the spoilers.
You could have just looked that up.
I'm joking. Well, I'm not joking, but it's fine.
Jay,
everyone knew
documentaries are
AOC
too
was
plot
elected.
focused. Documentaries these days are too driven by plot, not enough focus on character.
Don't even, Darren.
Yeah.
I don't think you can spoil the news, though, can you?
Can't you?
I record it at 9 o'clock every night, and I don't want anybody texting me until I get home.
Especially almost a year after said
election. I'm kidding. But I'm not kidding.
Yeah. I know where you're coming from. But
Don't tell me how Britain voted.
I love the idea that Jay sort of watches Brexit votes like people watch football matches, where it's like he goes through the entire day being like, don't tell me how the referendum turned out. I can't wait to go home and watch the count.
God, imagine if we could all do that for 3 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you could argue that the British government has been doing that for 3 years.
Darren getting political on us.
What a world, Darren.
People come for the movie talk, stay for the sick burns.
If only they could always have the level of vision and insight that they showed when they decided to vote that there was a climate emergency in the world. You're like, wow, look at that. Shocking levels of progress. Why are you so crap at everything else?
Anyway.
Led by the Extinction Rebellion protesters who held up an entire city for weeks until they finally got their act together. But yes, Jeremy Corbyn. Anyway, yes, Knock Down the House.
Well, we know who gets the edit in
recommended.
Jay's version of it. Jay's sort of like climate extinction version of
And
Knock
it's
Down the
Jeremy
House.
Corbyn.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
He took up the cudgel, in fairness.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's on Netflix. Also, female creative team. So,
Yes.
go for it, lads.
I'll be watching it. I haven't seen it.
It's only about an hour and a half long, too.
Yeah.
So
I'm on it.
very
90
easy.
minutes. I'm all over it.
Yeah. Also, on a completely aesthetic note, I find it hilarious that AOC's boyfriend is like a big, ginger, pale, like, it just looks like an Irishman. And you're kind of like, why are you here?
Please tell me he's not a multi-millionaire,
Just
though.
sticking out in this. No, I think he's just a randomer. But,
Nice.
as randomers go, he just looks really funny next to this group of multicultural people. And you're like, big Irish head in this fella. Anyway,
Love it.
continue.
All right, so Jay,
Mid-cheese biscuit.
Mid-cheese biscuit.
what have you watched since last we talked?
I've watched 50. No, I haven't. I've only got a few. I continued my Criterion Columbia noir one. As every week there's going to be one, so
Everything just got black and white
Get
in
used
here.
to it.
And it's a weird one because this had all the
Whether noir or far.
what? What happened there? Darren, have you
Act natural. Just continue.
Continue, Jay.
Jesus. This is a weird one. Nightfall by Jacques Tourneur, who made the Curse of Cat People and stuff like that.
It's been some interesting films.
Yes, very much so. And this is kind of the starriest cast of so far, which is like W.R.A.P and Bancroft in it.
Nice.
And weirdly, I didn't particularly like it. It's a really good cast. Has the kind of really nice scuzzy first act, which I love in a noir. Like it's this kind of story of this kind of innocent guy who has to kind of turn fugitive a little bit because he's being blamed on something. And then it's a kind of reconstruction of a kind of murder and events that happened before. So it's kind of two timeline kind of things. And it's fine. It works really well, but the plot kind of intrudes massively in the second half of it. That kind of robs it of its kind of noir beats. It gets a little too kind of weighed down in plot. Some great moments in it, but it just felt a touch inconsequential compared to the ones I've seen otherwise. Word-wise, like some of the cinematography is fantastic and the cast are great, and well worth a watch because I think it's only about 80 something minutes. So it's not going to hurt you to watch it. And reading on Letterboxd as well, quite a few people liked it a bit more than I did. So definitely worth watching. This is a fine director.
Are the series all B movies essentially?
Essentially, yeah. I think there's 11 of them on. One of them, the last one, the latest one, I think from the early 60s, is about 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is extremely rare, which I'll get to eventually. But they're
the 60s were the peak time in terms of film length, as we discussed last week.
So I will get to that and the rest of them as well. But this was good. Like, it was interesting. It just didn't quite work for me insofar as I was hoping it would. But that's the way these things. I watched Cold Pursuit.
I think you mean Hard Powder.
I think I mean
Why
Cold
did
Pursuit.
they rename it?
That's a
I kind of prefer Cold Pursuit.
Okay.
But
I'm not
anyway,
sure what either of those titles mean.
Nothing. Neither do
There's
mean anything.
snow.
Yeah,
and
there's
Liam
snow.
Neeson kills people.
It's
Oh,
Mr.
you
Plow.
just had
It's
to say
Mr. Plow.
It's Mr. Plow, the action movie, yeah.
No.
This is for obvious reasons. This will remind you of The Grey in various ways.
That was great.
The
Grey
Grey
is
is
fantastic,
the best the Neeson season.
Yeah, it is.
I think.
Yeah. This is you've got your classic grizzled Neeson doing his thing as a kind of is named Niels Coxman.
He's not.
Right, he is. Oh, he is. I can assure you, Ronan.
It's right up there with naming as a Colin Farrell's character in Dumbo, Holt Farrier, because he works with horses.
Holt Farrier?
Because he works with horses.
Fuck's sake.
Come on, it's great.
Liam Neeson must be feeling optimistic.
Yeah. Indeed.
Well, an Evian bottle.
But anyway, his
Janet Dickinson autobiography reference.
Yes,
here.
I know. I understand. I got
Continue.
That. Jesus. Always dragging the
This
podcast
is a family
levels down.
podcast.
I know, right?
That's why there's so much swearing.
Yes, indeed. But basically, his life comes kind of crashing down when his son dies.
Hate that.
Yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer, Grace. It's a real bummer. And
And the only thing that can help is a murder spree.
Yes.
Gotti.
So he thinks it's supposed to be purportedly a drug overdose, but he's kind of investigate. And if you've seen Payback or read any, if you've seen the John Boorman film with Lee Marvin, Point Blank, or any little kind of
any revenge
up the chain kind of thing of
where you follow you begin dismantling a criminal organisation
Who's the
and work your way
guy?
up. Yeah.
But I had, and it's very generic in that way. It's like, and it has this weird little affectation which I really like. It's like, so we kill somebody, it'll come up to this little cross and it's like R.I.P. in the name of the character on the screen, which I actually really like. And if it's a big action scene, there's like 6 of them. It's actually really like it.
That's good.
I like
That's
that.
like a video game.
Yeah, exactly. That's the vibe of it. Like.
I've also heard that at one, again, I haven't seen this, but I've heard that at one point he explains that he learned his method of body dismemberment and disposal by reading a crime novel.
Yeah, that sounds alright. And because it fits that
Wait,
kind
the
of thing.
character or Liam Neeson?
The character. Liam Neeson reads the script. He's like, I have some suggestions.
You never know. These people can get very method.
Liam
these
Neeson
days.
has worse things than that to say.
That's a fair point.
So anyway, Neeson grizzles his way through this in the way Neeson grizzles his way through everything.
Neeson Grissons.
But it's a really odd tone. Weirdly comedic, then deadly serious, and then strangely violent. And like I described it when I was talking about it to like 1 part true romance to 2 part dried across concrete, except good and shorter.
I was going to say it seems a bit harsh to mention true romance in the same sentence.
I know it, but it starts really kind of generically. Like the first half an hour is like, this is fucking terrible. Like, but then it settles down. It's a little too long, but I was never less than fascinated by kind of stylistic choices and really interesting ways of disposing of people and stuff. I liked it. Was not thinking maybe that it's might be any good at all, but I think it has something for it. Like there's something in it that I kind of liked. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm still not sure. And I've been thinking about it for like a few days, and it's like
Might never know.
No, it might not. But I wouldn't put anybody off watching it. It's absolutely fascinating.
I kind of
it
enjoy
didn't
when
leave you
films
cold.
do that to you.
Yeah,
though,
I
where
mean,
you're
me
like,
too,
this
but I
is
can't quite pin it
nonsense,
down.
But I can't stop thinking about it.
If I can't pin something down, I'm always fascinated by it because generally, and particularly in the kind of generic action beat kind of territory, which this kind of plays in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a remake of a Norwegian film.
Yes,
the same director has remade it, I think.
No.
I think Stellan Skarsgård might have been in the original, which
it was.
I do want to chase down. I think it's on Netflix or US Netflix or one of the Netflixes, and I might watch it.
Of course he was.
And
It was a Scandinavian film
the name
from the
is
early
similar,
2000s.
has a kind of similar to Coxman, that there's a kind of play on that kind of thing. Like, but anyway, that's fun if it is. But
multilingual dick jokes.
I'm fascinated to see, I'm really fascinated to see what Darren thinks of more so than anyone, because this,
You know he might actually watch
I
it.
know Darren. Well, I know Darren will watch it because Darren will watch literally anything for starters. But I also know he'll appreciate wordplay and weird action, strange sequences. I think this will be right in your wheelhouse.
I'm looking forward to this. I mean, I was put off by the obvious stuff around
the
it.
Neeson weirdness, but
and I mean, there was a lot of other stuff happening around that time of year as well, so it sort of distracted me from it. But I'm hoping to get to it at some point.
I think
I'm
you like
hoping
it.
to plow on through it.
Stop it. I'm fascinated to see what you think of it.
I don't think it'll leave me cold.
Oh God, I'm going to stop now. Anyway,
sorry, I'll chill out. What?
I'm giving dead air now.
Oh, I know there isn't.
One of these days, there's just going to be this like sort of squeak and shrill screaming noise, and we'll just be like, we have cut out Darren's tongue, so we can no longer.
He doesn't need it.
Things.
Well, to be fair, I've learned how to pun through pictures now. It's all good.
You would punch to anything.
That's a fair point.
That was a quality pun. I'll give you that.
Jesus.
So, it was.
I also watched Smithereens, which is a Susan Seidelman film from the early 80s. Susan Seidelman made Desperately Seeking Susan, which is fantastic. I watched it about a year or two ago. and it's really good. It has Madonna as a character dancing to a Madonna song in a nightclub, which is remarkably meta and really wonderful.
I love Madonna.
Yeah, me too. But
I really do.
her dancing to the Madonna song, like she doesn't know who Madonna is fucking fascinating on so many levels. Like, it's
Don't you think
bizarre.
your hair is a bit much?
Yeah. So this is a kind of like a scuzzy 80s New York version before she got budgets to do something like Desperately Seeking Susan. And it's about a kind of runaway in New York who's kind of awful. Like, played by Susan Berman. She's this kind of hanger-on, promises anything, leeching desperately to one person of her to kind of get ahead. And like there's this guy who's and it's kind of set in the kind of the arse end of the punk scene in New York. Like, so there's these around these clubs that, you know, the glory days of punk is gone. So these clubs are a bit kind of crappy, and the people are kind of crappy. There's this guy it might be a singer that might get somewhere, but also he's kind of terrible and not really very good. And there's a guy who lives in a van beside the road who's decent, but he just lives in a van, so he's no real good. But it's really funny and really strange. And Berman, who's the main character, and is fantastic. She's like, it's such an unlikable character, and she plays it so understated that like it's empathetic in a way that it shouldn't. You should hate her because she's awful and
This
completely
sounds like
awful.
a Greta Gerwig joint.
Yeah, exactly.
I should hate all of you, but I don't.
I guarantee Gerwig has seen this because it has that kind of New Yorky kind of woman lead strangeness kind of thing there. And this works really well. She's terrific. And the soundtrack is fantastic, full of kind of old punk favourites, which I barely knew, but I was kind of, and it used in such a propulsive way to kind of move the film forward. And I really like that. And Seidelman is a fascinating director, and there's an extraordinary final shot that I really, really loved. And like, I think it's only again like kind of in the 80-something minute mark, but absolutely, it feels like one of those essential New York films that, if it was directed by a guy, would be an essential New York film, but because it's not. Now, in fairness, it's starting to get a bit of
reappraisal.
A little bit, yeah. Where good films shouldn't need reappraisal; they should need appraisal. Yeah. You know, in the way that.
I mean, yeah, but
like
it was
never bad. It was ignored.
Yeah, I know.
You know, and that's the kind of thing. It's really good, and I liked it a lot. And it's one of those ones that you just kind of like, yeah, this is all right for me. The tone is right. They know just what they're doing, and they're doing it right. Like. But liked it a lot. But one more before I finish. And my film of the week in that regard is the first film I've seen of this director, and I'll be watching more. Charles Burnett's The Sleeper Anger, which is this remarkable film. Burnett, I only know a little bit about because he made a film called I think it's Killer Sheep in the 70s, which I've heard amazing things about.
I've seen that.
Have you?
Yeah, it's really, really good.
I heard really good things, and I haven't seen it. I'll be getting to it soon. But this is one that was made in the 70s, and he was kind of a pioneer black director in the 70s. Yeah. Pre-Spike Lee, I guess, and that kind of era of filmmakers. He made this in 1990, so this is Danny Glover starring in it. This is post-Lethal Weapon Danny Glover.
Oh, okay. So some star wattage.
Yeah, a little bit. And the poster is really weird. If you ever look at the poster, it looks like some sort of zany comedy, which it's not at all. But I mean, that's really funny. It's set in kind of South Central LA in 1990, right? In the kind of like modern era in that regard. But the kind of corner of it where the people that are living, it looks quite nice. It's not, you know, this is not gang war territory, if you like. They're not aiming for that pitch. Yeah. And it's basically these people come up from kind of, Danny Glover comes from the old town where they used to live. This kind of, they all moved from the kind of south up to the city. And he comes up, like, he hasn't seen there's a couple that live there and their kids, a kind of older couple and their kind of adult kids. And he comes up to see them. He's like an old friend from back in the day. They haven't seen him in 30 years. And he's this kind of drifter, you know, he's coming through and he's like, stop and say hello to him. And he kind of invites himself to stay in the house and doesn't really leave. And there's this, Glover is sensational. I mean, sensational. It's like, this is Oscar territory performance, like. And he's like this kind of a densely rich kind of story about kind of myth making in terms of who are you? Do you remember the time when we did this? And people are like, you know, I've moved on from that kind of thing. Yeah. You know, this kind of, you know, Danny, he was always a bad guy back in the day, but then, you know, he was your friend. So, you know, you've moved on. Have the world moved on? That's this history and real guilt about displacement of moving on and get better in your life. kind of thing. So there's this kind of weird underlying biblical retribution layer to it in that kind of southern kind of church. Yeah, you know, they kind of laying on the guilt and the preacher kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. And the editing is unbelievable. It's stunningly subtly edited, and I love a subtle edit, like in the sense that it's not leading you by the hand, but there's stuff going on, kind of sly, kind of little movements. It is brilliant, like brilliant. And it's one of those films that you think, oh, this is top tier, and I really can't wait to watch it again. Ron in particular, I think you'll absolutely love it.
Yeah,
and he's
because Killer Sheep is extraordinary.
Yeah, that's on my list, and I think a couple of others. I think there's 3 of his films on the Criterion Channel, so not Killer Sheep, but just a couple of others.
I wasn't familiar with any of
so I'm going to watch them. This is great. Like, I mean, top tier great.
All right.
Get on it.
All right, very quickly from myself, I didn't have a lot of time for movie watching this week because I watched one very long movie 4 times. But anyway, let's move on. What I watched was
Endgame.
It was Endgame. But I watched The Dig.
You look very confused.
Yes, I watched The Dig.
Showa.
Yeah, 4 times. Just to
really understand it, but it's Holocaust.
Yeah, I know, just sort of like to absorb it. To be fair, I didn't choose to watch it 4 times. That just sort of happened. Like Baby Driver.
Either.
Like Baby Driver.
Stop it.
But anyway, what I did watch is I did get a chance to see The Dig, which was a new release last week, but unfortunately didn't make the top 10. This is the Irish film. It's directed by Andy and Ryan Tohill. It was at the Film Festival last year. Niall saw it. Niall loved it. I saw it. I really, really liked it. It's this really great sort of atmospheric, again, wonderful use of the Irish landscape, but also this sort of wonderful, almost mythic Irish story about the weird relationship that we have with the land around us, in the sense that, like, the land may betray us, and the land may lie to us, and the land may swallow us whole, whether literally, physically, or metaphorically. And it's got this sort of raw power. It's driven by a set. It's a very intimate film. It's mostly set on a bog. The basic premise is that there may or may not be a body buried on this bog.
So it's a search.
And so there's a search across that. And the man who was sentenced for the murder of this woman arrives home to discover that her father has been digging on that bog every day for the past 7 years or so. And he can't remember he was blackout drunk when it happened. So he has to basically navigate and try to figure that out. And so there's this search across the bog to try and find a body, which may not even be there.
It's a cracking idea.
It's a great idea, and it's a very intimate film. It's driven by a set of wonderful performances. Mo Dunford is great, in particular, as Ronan Callahan, the man responsible for this, who initially just wants the family off his land, but eventually gets kind of drawn into this story of, like, trying to find something or trying to make peace. And there's this, and again, Lorcan Cranach plays Sean McKenna, who's the father. He's fantastic. But again, there's this weird, this relationship that Irish people have with the land, where you have this idea of the fairy forts that exist on it, but even things like eating the berries and hoping that will bring you a spiritual connection with the land and jog Ronan's memory of what happened there. And it's very powerful. It's very evocative. The cinematography is absolutely striking. The west of Ireland is a beautiful landscape. Anybody who's ever been there will know. Yeah. Anybody who's watched any film set there will know in particular. But it's captured elegantly here. Angus Mitchell does the cinematography, and it's got this wonderful sort of washed out grey, greeny, brown, dreary, depressing sort of atmosphere where you get that sense of a vast landscape. But again, this is an Irish Western in a very literal sense. But this idea that while the West for Americans represented freedom and liberty and unlimited potential,
the frontier.
The frontier. For Irish people, it's this thing that can turn on you, kill you, and condemn you. Yeah. And it's very evocative. It's very powerful. Great score from James Everett as well, which is very atmospheric. It's this sort of like soft, sort of almost like Brian Eno-esque ambient sound, which kind of emphasizes silence, which is a remarkable thing for a soundtrack to do. When you think, well, just be silent, but this sort of underscores those moments of quietness. It is perhaps a little bit too still in places, and the ending of the film, while I admire it and I think it's very well set up and I think it works from a plotting point of view, it feels just a little bit too neat with everything that came before. But I have absolutely no qualms in recommending it, and if you can see it, it may still be screening in the IFI and the Lighthouse next week. If you can see it before it leaves cinemas, please do. I wholeheartedly recommend it.
I hope to, actually, if I can.
Very, very good. And then a couple of rewatches, because...
Baby Driver?
Of course, but we're not going to talk about that.
Oh, okay.
No, because
Did you really?
I've been, because of comments that I have made about recent superhero films, it has been suggested that Darren is a cynical and world-weary individual who has no joy in his heart and cannot, like, embrace the sheer exuberance and enthusiasm of these movies when they're done well. So I went back and I rewatched Joss Whedon's 2012 Avengers, which is the original team-up film.
Best Marvel film.
No, but the best Avengers film by a significant distance. It's also fascinating because it demonstrates this argument. Like, I've been accused of being overly cynical with regards to discussing the Marvel films and being taking things perhaps a bit too seriously and a bit too literally and applying a bit too much sort of like intellectual rigor. That's it exactly. No, but without being too flippant, there's a sense of that where it's like, why can't you sit back and enjoy it? These are meant to be good fun films. The Avengers is great fun from beginning to end. But one of the things that's fascinating about Whedon's work on Avengers in particular is the way in which there's a trend towards deconstructing and sort of picking apart the idea of superheroes and the idea that they stand as an allegory for American power and the use of power and the application of that power and so like that. You think of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, you think of Shane Black's Iron Man 3, which I also watched. But even things like, say, Alan Moore's Miracle Man, or we discussed a couple of weeks ago Akira, which is the Japanese film. And again, it's interesting that so many of these deconstructions come from people who are not Americans, because there's an understanding of looking at it from the outside and sort of deconstructing that. What's interesting about the Avengers in particular as a Whedon film, and particularly in contrast to the later Avengers films where they're not necessarily aware, I think, of everything that's going on in them. But the thing with Whedon is that he constructs it as a romanticized alternative to American power. In that Avengers is very, very consciously aware of what the superhero represents or what the superhero can represent. It's a firmly militarized version of the superhero. Again, it's the war on terror. But I mean, even if you think about the Avengers, the concept, Captain America as a soldier, Iron Man as a tech industrialist, that sort of stuff, the Hulk as a man who blew himself up building an atomic bomb. But even outside of that, you have this idea of the post-the war on terror where everything is defined in relation to the military and in entertainment. But with the Avengers, what Whedon does is he uses them not as an allegory for them, like Nolan uses Batman, to pick an example, or like Black uses Stark in Iron Man 3. What Whedon does is he uses them as an alternative. There's this strong recurring motif that runs through the film of we are not soldiers. The idea that what makes these characters unique as avatars of American idealism and power is that they don't represent that sort of military-industrial complex. The climax of the film quite literally juxtaposes the idea of these characters and the power which they wield, which is massive in scale, with this contrasting that with a nuclear bomb literally heading towards a population center. And there's this idea, and again, it gets back to something that the writer Grant Morrison discussed. And Grant Morrison is a Scottish writer who's a big fan of the genre. And his argument is that when he was a kid growing up in Glasgow in the 60s, there were two ideas when he thought of America. The first idea was the bomb, and the bomb was terrifying, and the bomb was frightening, and the bomb haunted his dreams. But there was another idea, and that idea was Superman. And that idea of Superman was this idea of power that was used exclusively for good and for righteous things. And in Morrison's mind, allegorically, metaphorically, magically even, this is a man who believes he was abducted by aliens and given the plot for 7 years of Batman stories. But in Morrison's head, the idea was that you could use Superman as an allegory to kind of counter the idea of the bomb, to construct a metaphor of power that was not a metaphor, an allegory, an excuse for the weaponization or the military-industrial complex. And what's interesting about the Avengers is it's built very much along those lines. It's very much about characters who have been designed and programmed and applied as weapons. The Tesseract at the heart of the story was going to be used by Fury to build weapons of mass destruction. The Hulk, again, got his powers through an atomic bomb. Stark builds weapons. Captain America is a military soldier. But what's remarkable, even in the context of Natasha Romanoff, the spy, has been an assassin and murdered people. Hawkeye, at the start of the film, is brainwashed and turned into a soldier, so he takes lives without following orders, without questioning them. And what the Avengers argues, and it's a remarkable argument, is that it juxtaposes that with this idea of an incredible humanism and idea of aspiration. These people choose not to be soldiers. They choose to reject the powers and structures imposed on them. Most obviously, the film involves a huge climax set during an attack on New York, which is very much framed in the style of 9/11, but which takes a lot of time out to depict civilians and to explore the lives of people who are affected indirectly. There's a waitress who appears as rescued at one point and appears as a talking head later on. There's a sequence in which Captain America directs first responders because that's the most important thing to do in a crisis. There's a sequence in which he saves a bunch of people from an attack. And what's interesting is that there's a sequence where Iron Man and Nick Fury decide that, nuking Manhattan is not an option in this situation because that's not how you apply that power. That's not how you're supposed to apply that power. And there's something very warm and sort of fuzzy in that. And indeed, it's telling that at the end of the film, perhaps as a reflection of Marvel's like lack of, well, we've never done this before and we've no idea what we're going to do with it. The film makes a point to end with the idea that, first of all, these characters disavow any sense of organization. They move away from any sort of centralized authority. But they also separate themselves. There's the idea that this sort of power does not actually exist and should not be glamorized, glorified, and sort of like fetishized. And the idea is you end up with Cap on a motorbike, Thor heading off to wherever, Tony Stark going off to get married and presumably live happily ever after. And the idea that that's the end of it. The idea that you have this idea of power that isn't centralized. And it's interesting watching that after having watched the later movies, the Rousseau movies in particular, the Rousseau brothers movies in particular, which tend to strip out a lot of that humanity and tend to fetishize a lot of that power and tend to like treat these characters very much as soldiers who command armies. There's sequences at the end of both Infinity War and, without getting too spoilery, Endgame, in which you have literal armies led by these people in full-scale assaults that are filmed in like something from The Longest Day. Yeah. And it's fascinating that Whedon consciously rejected that. In
fairness, though, I would suggest that Whedon's film was made in the Obama era. And I think if you're talking about kind of how America is and I think that's really what these films not necessarily consciously respond to, but certainly they exist in a certain... Yeah, and they don't exist independently, certainly.
Absolutely not.
And I think if you're nearly a decade later with the same people trying to do the same things, compromises, losses, like compromise in terms of your own morality or your own kind of view of the world may have soured, and your own kind of like what I suggest, and I haven't seen Endgame, but certainly Infinity War would suggest that, and going towards that would suggest that the world of the Avengers was a rosy world in relative terms, in the way that the Obama world in relative terms was a rosy world.
But again, it was a world populated with like actual people who existed without any sense of like a will to power.
I understand that, but the world isn't that now.
Yeah. Well, the world still
of course has, but the world that people exist in to do the things you're talking about is what I'm suggesting. That may be a much murkier, darker, weirder, less personal, more impersonal place.
But that also makes sense in a context within the MCU itself, where a lot of the power structures went a bit tits up after a while and led to the characters within that world becoming a lot more cynical and disillusioned than they would have been a few years ago.
Well, I mean,
and also with the like very overarching existential threats, like Thanos literally descending from outer space.
Well, I mean,
it becomes much bigger.
But this is exactly it, though. It's the same core fears. It's 9/11 all over again. In Infinity War, you have a woman thrown from a structure with 2 tall towers looming over it, which is just as much a 9/11 parable as madness pouring through a hole in the sky over New York.
But
through a different
lens. A different lens and a different world. Like the 2012,
far
I think,
more
Avengers,
jaded
was it?
lens.
2012?
2012,
2012 world of 9/11 was a respectful... honouring of a certain thing. Do you know what I mean? The 2018 world of 9/11 is how we acknowledge that Trump was on the phone talking about his building's the biggest building in New York now. That kind of territory is where 9/11 lives in a lot of ways. Like the respectful kind of connotations of what that is or what that was is gone in a lot of ways.
I mean, you say that though as if this isn't a movie that's jaded in its own way about this sort of stuff.
Listen,
but it looks incredibly quaint in hindsight.
Yeah, no, I'd love it.
But I mean, in a post-Endgame world, when you look back on it, you think
the Avengers looks like the Rocketeer almost.
Yeah,
in that kind of naivety.
And that's a good thing about it. But it is something that would not work, I think, in today's world.
But the issue...
Not in the same way.
But I mean, again, you had like the Nolan movies, which were jaded. And I know they were at the cusp of the Bush and Obama eras, to be fair. But like, it's more that like this is a style that suits this particular style of superhero story. You could do a version of the Avengers that is as dark or as gritty, as depressive as the one you're describing. I don't think that the later movies are that. Like you could
disagree.
Okay.
I've rewatched Infinity War, and Infinity War is nihilistic in lots of ways, and I'm not talking about the end of it, which is obviously explicit in terms of how it sees kind of ending of certain things, like, but I mean way before that, like everything about it, like even there's a moment in the train station in Glasgow where Captain America appears, you know, with the beard,
Yeah.
looking fabulous and all. But that should be one of those
Audible gasp.
But that should be one of those glorious moments, and it is to a certain
absolutely is. He
No, hang
catches
on,
up.
hang on
Okay.
a second. It is, but it's not though. Like, he looks tired and exhausted in the film. Like, the film, like, this isn't Captain America in the sunburst of the Avengers you're talking about. Like, and that,
Literally, like,
I
you
think
know,
that's
there's
really
a scene
important. I
at
think
the
that's
end
very
of-
explicitly made, that point. It's in shadow, and it's in fear,
Yeah.
and it's in sadness.
Yeah, if you
already
contrast
for a
that
world
with
that's gonna
the,
end. Yeah.
there's a scene at the end of the Avengers when they've woken Tony up essentially after he, you know, almost died for a while, and there's a shot of Steve where I swear to God, it's like the sun is shining on his face.
Those
His
days are
eyes
over.
are sparkling. His eyelashes are so long. He looks incredible because, of course, he
No,
looks
of course he
incredible.
does, yeah.
But in the context of what Jay is saying, it's a very explicit framing of him in this beautiful, warm,
Yeah. Those
sunny
days are
glow,
over.
and then to fast forward to Infinity War where you're stepping out the shadows and he's
He
meant
actually,
to be
even
a
the
bit
step
more
is
rough
slow and tired.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not even glorious.
It's rugged. It's like
It's rugged, but
no,
it's not-
It's
but
rugged
it's-
in like a. It's like
No,
rah,
he's
rah.
yeah, sure. He's got a beard. He looks great, but but even a step forward looks tired.
Everyone in this
it looks
podcast
exhausted
would date Chris Evans.
to my mind.
Okay.
And watching it in that kind of sliding scale of depravity which America's kind of went on in the last whatever many years, and it's not Trump, it's pre-Trump, but it's certainly Trump has accelerated to a remarkable scale, would suggest that these films go hand in hand in that regard.
Okay, I would agree to a certain extent that you need to be more cynical about these things, and it's fair to be cynical about these things. I would
It's almost
disagree with those.
apocalyptic, Darren. I don't think it's even
it is.
cynical.
No, I don't think it is though. It strips any sense of meaning out of them.
I haven't
Anyway,
seen Endgame.
That's a point of
When I get to
contention.
Endgame, we'll talk about it for 5 hours.
That's a
Darren.
point of contention. And then
Asterix we will not talk about for 5 hours.
finally, I also watched Iron Man 3, which is released the year after the Avengers and is a much more cynical film, and is also brilliant. Quite possibly one of the
It's
best.
the best film of those ones.
It's quite
No,
possibly.
but I haven't seen the last 8.
It's quite possibly up there. It certainly is. It's amazing, and again, it's wonderfully cynical and it's
very
wonderfully
good.
bleak.
I
And
do
it's-
like it, I'd say.
It's the antithesis of what I talked about with the Avengers, where the Avengers is Whedon looking at the superhero genre and saying, how can I make the parts of this that are uncomfortable work? And Whedon doing that. Iron Man 3 is like, well, how about we just take those aspects, turn them all the way up, and just sort of like confront you with them in a way that makes you really uncomfortable, is really effective, and is very funny and clever at the same time. Yep. It's notably, like, again, around this time there was this push in the MCU towards like incorporating different film styles. Famously, the argument that Ant-Man is a heist film, to pick an example, or The Winter Soldier is a 70s conspiracy.
Literally with Robert Redford.
With Robert Redford in it. Iron Man 3 is an 80s action movie, right down to the fact that there's an incredible emphasis on gun-fu, physical play.
It's Shane Black,
puns.
don't fairness.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what you're getting.
Made his bones
Even
in
a set
80s
at
action.
Christmas.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
But I mean, even like the sequence where like Tony's wrestling with your woman through the small town, to pick an
shouldn't.
example, or the sequence that involves him hopping from suit to suit, which is again, and they're all very, very. It works really well in that sense because it actually feels different from a lot of the movies around it.
The last good Shane Black film?
Well, I mean,
Yes.
Okay, well, hold on, Nice
Oh, yeah.
Guys.
No.
Nice
No,
Guys
no,
is
no.
not a good film.
I like
No.
Nice Guys.
Nice Guys.
I'm going to go back for
Iron
Nice
Man
Guys.
3 also has incredible, obviously because Shane Black wrote it, has incredible lines in it.
Yeah.
So,
It is
I
so
must
funny.
rewatch
extremely
The bit
funny.
where like the small child is like to him, "Are you just gonna leave me here like my dad?" And he's like, "Yeah." Bye.
It is ruthless and that kind of thing.
I love it.
I'm cold. I know. You know how I know that? Because we're connected. Bye! Which is great. But again, and it has this sort of like weird thing where it sort of deals with, and again, it's this idea of, there's that wonderful line from Rhodey, this isn't superhero business, this is American business. And you have this rebranding of him as the Iron Patriot,
yeah.
where he literally paint the Iron Man red, white, and blue in order to get the point across. But even things like,
Scarlet for you.
that have aged remarkably well. Like the villain played by Guy Pearce, who is this sort of like nerd who's really, really, really
I have
angry.
completely forgot about him.
He's
I need to rewatch this.
He's humiliated at the start of the film with his long hair and his thin frame and his ill-fitting jacket. So what does he do? He goes off, he learns a couple of pickup artist tricks, he gets a bleach job, he works out a bit, and all of a sudden he's the
It's a
tech...
snappy suit.
He's in Memento.
He's he's a tech entrepreneur,
Of course,
baby, because of
the
course
worst 2 words in the world.
Yeah.
He stole his ideas from a woman.
Yeah, and I mean, more than that, there's even the bit where he has, like, Pepper Potts kidnapped, and it's like, having you here is not just to motivate Tony Stark, it's actually more embarrassing than that. You're here as my, trophy.
Oh.
Yep. And very
so
much
icky.
And it is, and the film is not at all subtle about the fact that rather than him being like a stand-in for an evil Iron Man, he's a stand-in for an evil Tony Stark. And it's very much this idea that Stark is the problem, not the idea of the superhero, the costume around it. There's a wonderful moment at the end where, absolutely, Stark is a nightmare.
Awful person.
But the idea is that at the end of the
film that gets that.
That it is exactly. Yeah. It very much does. Right down to the fact that, he very much, he's the model for this sort of monstrous sort of thing that's created in his own image. The point where he, like, at the climax of the film, he ties your man up in the Iron Man armor and detonates it while blowing up all of his other Iron Man armor, because that's really the only way in Shane Black's moral universe that you could do something that is remotely decent as Tony Stark. And it's a huge shame that the later films kind of backed away from that and retreated from that, which is a shame.
I'm going to rewatch it. It's been years. I really enjoyed it when I watched it, but I need to kind of go back.
The Ben Kingsley stuff is incredible.
Yes, I loved that. And I didn't know anything about that.
I was the exact same. I went in being like, oh yeah, this is that. Oh my god.
Well, I mean, the thing with several things about that. First of all, I've been doing research for a thing involving fandom. So I've been like excavating and exploring. And what's remarkable is you can actually see, like, you can trace the flipping of the switch on internet fandom back to like 2013, which is when this was released, where you started having sites like Cinema Blend saying Iron Man 3 ruined the Mandarin and real fans should be pissed. Along the same time that you had Star Trek fans at conventions voting Into Darkness the worst Star Trek movie, despite the fact that The Final Frontier exists. But you had this sort of idea of like this backlash that was brewing really coming to the fore. And like, this is one of the reasons why I suspect you wouldn't get a movie like Iron Man 3 today, because you'd end up with a Last Jedi type situation where they'd be like, what? I wanted my Yellow Peril villain, thank you very much. And it's like, okay.
Trump tweeting about it.
Yeah.
You would. Oh god, you would.
Yeah.
You absolutely would.
But that said, there are other issues there as well. The film is blemished somewhat by the fact that apparently Black wanted the villain to be Rebecca Hall's Maya character. But he was vetoed by Marvel because action figures involving women don't sell as well. This famously led to the incident with Age of Ultron in 2015, where there's a sequence involving Black Widow on a bike, and the toy set made the executive decision to suggest that Captain America was the character involved because it would make the toys easier to sell.
It makes it even more miraculous that Iron Man 3 is as good as it was to get around all that corporate guff.
I do, and part of me suspects that that's why you end up with this sort of really strong misogynistic streak running through the villain of the piece, who is very, very much,
Disney, in real terms.
So that's about it in terms of films that I watched. But let's talk about the week in film news. Big news this week, the passing of John Singleton.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. We're just going
This would be hilarious if we just said, moving on.
Somebody that hasn't had the most prolific of careers in a lot of ways. Like
he's had an interesting and inverted commas
career. He came in like all guns blazing with Boys in the Hood, which is a remarkably brilliant film.
The first African American man to be nominated for the Best Director Oscar, and the youngest nominee at the age of 24. Imagine producing something like Boys in the Hood at the age of 24.
Remarkable. It's a great film.
What have you done with your life?
Nothing great. I
was shocked to read he passed away at the age of 51 because he's, as somebody who watched Boys in the Hood at the age of like 10, living in like Sligo in the west of Ireland, it was a revelation. Yeah. And it's kind of like,
because I could see the kind of connection to South Central LA.
I mean, I just felt like it was my life on screen. But the idea of like being sincere, the idea of film as an empty machine to describe Roger Ebert, to quote Roger Ebert, but this idea of like Singleton finding a way to bring that to a mass audience, but also at the age of 24, he's 51.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It was only half his life ago. I think crucially what you say about watching that as a kid in Sligo, it almost had the same effect as to a kid in New York, which is kind of incredible that, in a much closer context, he opened up American cinema in that way. It wasn't just people away from that context in Ireland or in other countries. Yeah. So it's very much not something that America through mainstream cinema had necessarily engaged with very much. The black experience and the reality of being a black kid growing up, trying to move away from the life that you're pushed towards by the society that you're in.
I mean, even things like the discussion of gentrification in there as well. Like, it's one of those great scenes in movies that should be didactic, heavy-handed, clumsy, but it's brilliant. And one of the scenes that I think about when I think about, sort of like films that reformative to me. Again, Jay sort of alluded to it. Singleton had an interesting career, perhaps, is probably the best way to describe it. Other films including Poetic Justice, Higher Learning, and Baby Boy. But his later filmography is perhaps notable for a shift towards more action-oriented, sort of like mid-range thriller movies. The kind
That was
of
a Taylor Kitsch thing a few years back.
yeah, but
Four Brothers.
Four Brothers is
decent.
him as well.
I
With his Wahlberg
quite
and
liked it.
yeah.
It's not bad. It's director for hire in the way that I think the Fast and Furious ones is as well.
Well, Too Fast, Too Furious, which is
but the awful.
you
series.
haven't watched the fourth film.
Right. I haven't seen the Shaft film. The word is good in it. The
Shaft?
remake. I heard decent things.
Shaft is an interesting film. Again, it's very much, it's not quite as work for hire as Too Fast, Too Furious, but because it very much touches on this idea of things like privilege, power, race, as you might expect from a Shaft film, in that the villain is quite literally Christian Bale the same summer that American Psycho came out, and he's a white guy who I think like sexually assaulted a woman and got away with it, and that's basically the level of villainy that Shaft is dealing with. But yeah, and it's interesting, and it's sad that his career maybe didn't continue as meteorically as Boys in the Hood
That
might
kind
have.
of a debut would have
suggested.
Imagine trying to live up to that.
Yeah.
Just such an incredible entry.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's not as if he ever wanted for work. He co-created the TV series Snowfall as well, which ran for 2 seasons, which is about the crack epidemic in Los Angeles.
I heard very
1993
good.
as
I
well.
haven't seen it yet.
Worked quite a bit in TV in the last couple.
Yeah, he did stuff around American Crime Story as well, which really good work. Like it's one of those filmmakers. I think a lot of people felt that didn't quite hit the heights that perhaps they thought he would,
or perhaps that he deserved.
And no, absolutely. And I imagine there's barriers to that as well, particularly in the last couple of decades.
His filmography is actually surprisingly light for a director.
Yeah, that's
whose
exactly
first
the
film
point.
was in 1991.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because whatever I talk about, like Shaft and Baby Boy, Too Fast, Furious, and Four Brothers or whatever,
Poetic Justice
like,
and stuff like that. Yeah,
there's these huge gaps in there.
there is.
Yeah,
in the way that any women filmmakers and people of colour filmmakers will be familiar with that. The opportunities don't necessarily come up for obvious reasons, tragically, and we don't know what else he could or would have done.
Yeah.
But that's the way these things. And kind of ironically, that there in TV particularly, there's a lot more, or seems to be a lot more opportunities for minorities at the moment.
Yeah.
And he'll miss out tragically. I know Snowfall is the thing, but like, who knows what the next decade.
Also,
would have brought
worked on, as you
within
point out,
that, like,
Empire, American Crime Story, Billions. He directed Billions.
Yeah, Billions is great.
Billions is bonkers.
It's one of those kind of awful people shows that are really entertaining.
Yeah.
And rich people do
Perhaps
bad
because,
things to each other.
Because it doesn't have the veneer of prestige that a lot of those shows have. It just sort of goes straight for,
I
actually want this, don't you?
I have a lot of respect for TV shows that actually
you want
reveal
this lurid
themselves
stuff.
to be horrible kind of things and let people have at it. Because it's not pretending to be something that they're not. Yeah. Succession being the perfect example of that. But,
I love Succession.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the as an example of the kind of thing that's pretending to be what it's not.
Oh no,
Succession's amazing. It's one of my 2 favorite.
But those kind of things, I don't mind that. And Singleton obviously has directed shows, and like the weird thing about TV is like you'll see so many filmmakers of the last 20-25 years who will pop up on episodes of TV.
Yeah,
like
you'll see the director by credit and be like, I mean, was it William Friedkin directed episodes of CSI?
Yeah.
Which was astounding to me. Even as a like 10-year-old kid watching my grand, I was like, wait, that can't be again.
But even things like John Dahl, who would have great neo-noir kind of success in the early 90s, has directed 15, 16 different TV shows at this stage of different stuff. Like this is the way it goes. Like and the Deep Impact director, Bibi Leaders, a lot of stuff on the leftovers, stuff like that. This is the way it goes.
Is it Rachel Talalay who directed? Was it Tank Girl?
Yes.
Is best known, or sort of working now on the Doctor Who. She did the season finales with Moffat, which was great.
There you go. Give good filmmakers work.
Yeah,
you
that's
bastards.
exactly. Also notable, actually, because again, I'm just browsing through his filmography here. It's kind of impressive that he was one of the many filmmakers who cameoed in Beverly Hills Cop 3. Which is one of those like
that's remarkable in the sense that I've never seen it. I imagine it's as bad as I think it is.
It's probably about as bad as you think it is, but it's worth it.
Oh, it's that theme park one. I haven't seen it. It's dreadful.
It's worth it for what is George Lucas doing there?
It's just as bad as you can't remember it is.
Yeah.
It should also be noted that Tony Scott directed Beverly Hills Cop 2 and should be watched because Tony Scott's
Tony Scott is a god among men.
God.
The superior Scott, TM.
Yeah, what Gray said.
We're going to move swiftly on from that. The Irish Screen Industry IFI Spotlight 2019 is taking place on May 30th.
Tell me more, Darren.
Why, thank you, Jay, for that.
It's okay, I'll set you up.
No,
It's funny you should bring this up.
Yeah. I've been wanting to know more about this all day.
Uh-huh.
The IFI Spotlight is one of the highlights of the Irish film calendar. It basically brings together a host of voices in Irish film to discuss pertinent issues that have happened over the course of the past year, including changes in the industry, transitions, the future.
Different themes and trends that's existed in films.
So basically, there's a program that's being run. At the moment, there's 2 slots in the morning, 2 slots in the afternoon, and a wonderful lunch available for €7.95.
I heard there's some scrappy up-and-comer called Niall Murphy hosting one of the...
There are indeed.
That guy.
I know, right?
So we're going to kick off at 10:40 a.m. In the IFI with 2018.
Are we going?
With 2018 in review, which is Roddy Flynn of DCU and Tony Tracy of NUIG are reviewing film and television.
We're going to
in
have a
2018.
field trip. Everyone rock up with your backpacks and your packed lunch.
That's it, and your notes. Bring notes. Make notes.
I want oranges.
But they'll be talking about
Does anyone have any orange slices?
They're talking about the year in terms of film production distribution in Irish television, and looking at new trends, hopefully going forward as well. Yeah. Following that, at 11:50, Annie Duna, who's chair of Screen Ireland, will be hosting a check-in on gender equality, looking at trends and sort of initiatives aimed at making the Irish film industry more inclusive. Much needed.
I might turn up there to just ask questions, Darren.
Oh.
Sorry.
There was a great question last year.
Was there?
There was. From somebody who considers himself more of a humanist, really, than
Oh,
no.
Run away!
Nothing.
There's a red flag, isn't it? Wait,
it's one of those, I'm not a blank, but...
That's when the sniper in the balcony just takes his aim.
Take him.
Oh, Christ.
But
it was not good.
No.
It was not good.
But don't worry, in case that happens, you're going to be breaking for lunch about 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock... this is the one that I think we may all be waiting for. There's going to be a timely investigation of Irish co-production practice, providing an overview of international co-production opportunities for Irish producers, inward production of major TV dramas, extension of Section 481, and the cultural viability of international co-productions. A range of panelists representing sectorial interests will include Sion Nurala...
Beautiful there.
Sorry, Sion Ni Rada. I apologize.
Okay, let's just show us the name.
Somebody make it stop. I'd be worse at it, in fairness.
Where? Shun. Ni Rahali, I'm going to go with. Rahali.
Yes.
Great work all around, lads.
A series of guests.
The CEO of Ardmore Studios. David Collins, the managing director of Sansom Films. Samantha Pariah, MBE, who's the head of production and the British Film Commission. Stephen Davenport, the inward production manager, and Fionn Higgins, the senior supervisor at Windmill Lane. The panel will be chaired by none other than Mr. Niall Murphy,
Esquire,
the editor of Scannain.
I've never heard of this guy. Who is he?
He's good at chairing panels.
Is he very tall?
He casts a very long shadow.
Yeah.
You may have heard him chairing podcasts in the past.
And then finally the day will close with an exit interview with James Hickey.
Oh man, if he gives upward feedback, that's going to be hysterical. I want to see this.
Yeah, he ended.
So what did you think of the time? I hated it.
Tripe. Here's why.
But yeah, he's ending his 8-year sort of stewardship of Screen Ireland, and he'll be in conversation with Hugh Lenahan of the Irish Times.
I got to be honest with you, next interview should be done in private. But that's just me.
I don't think it's the exit. I hope it's not.
It would be very funny if it were.
And somebody
kill
from
the
HR
lights,
was
kill
there.
the light, kill the mic, kill the mic.
The HR guy is there and everything's like really embarrassed. Like, what the hell am I doing
There's
here?
something they're not telling you.
Who are these people?
Why am I being interviewed?
All right. Also, the Western Regional Audiovisual Production Fund, or the W.R.A.P Fund, has announced supported projects for the year ahead.
Did I get any money?
Jay, I'm afraid to tell you that this year...
God damn it.
Not again.
Did you forget to enter again?
No, my superhero idea was really good. It was called In-Game.
Begin game. But yeah, so basically they've announced their funding. Among the highlights previously announced as a recipient of funding was Nick Rowland's Irish-made drama Calm with Horses, which is in post-production and which will be presented to buyers at Marché du Film at the Cannes Film Festival later this May.
Marché du Film.
Marché du Film.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, Grace.
You should be presenting the show.
Yeah.
You should.
Not that you're not great at
I second that. Set in rural Ireland, the film follows ex-boxer Arm, who has become the feared enforcer of the drug-dealing Devers family while trying to be a good father to his autistic 5-year-old son. Torn between these two families, Arm is asked to kill for the first time, as attempts to do the right thing endangers everyone he holds dear.
Okay.
So that'll be an interesting pitch, and it's, again, you may see that at the Marché du Cannes. Other films that have benefited from the W.R.A.P fund include the Irish-Canadian co-production Matt Bissonnette's Death of a Ladies' Man, which begins shooting in Galway in late May.
Why have I heard of this?
The film stars Irish actor Gabriel Byrne.
Jesus.
Don't kill
Gabriel Byrne is still going strong.
Yeah. Sorry, it's shooting in late May and stars Irish actor.
Gabriel May.
Yeah.
Stand down, everyone. Gabriel Byrne is still alive.
Yeah.
Stand down.
As a heart-drinking, womanizing university poetry professor.
Oh, God. Jesus.
Woody Allen is back.
Yeah. The title is inspired by the work of Canadian musician Leonard Cohen and his 1977 album of the same name. Cohen was supportive of the project prior to his death in 2016, and the management continues support. So this will be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah.
Other features that have benefited as well. David Turpin's new Irish genre film, The Winter Lake, which has just completed production in Sligo. Wonderful Sligo. It stars Anson Boone as Tom, who has relocated from the UK to Ireland with his Irish-born mother.
Because Brexit.
That is the true
before.
horror at the sort of genre
It's the
film.
new genre.
Yeah.
Brexit
horror.
relocation films.
We feel like we're speaking to the moment. While exploring the dilapidated farm, Tom comes across the farm's seasonal lake, at the bottom of which he discovers the skeleton of an infant.
I got seasonally?
What is this, like the Kerry Babies or something, but in Sligo?
And possibly as a horror movie.
Jesus.
A network of lies and secrets begins to unravel, pulling Tom into violent confrontation with the darkest parts of human nature.
The Catholic Church, no doubt.
Other film support include the documentary Screamers, which is in pre-production, which will be shot across Donegal and Sligo, which is on radical female-fronted commune based in Ireland's northwest for over 4 decades.
Interesting.
That sounds more like it.
Yeah. Oops, Back in the Deep End, which is an animated feature by director Sean McCormick and Toby Jenkel, which is in production in Galway City. It's a sequel to 2x2, Oops, the Ark is Gone. When best friends Finney the Nestrian and Leia the Grymph are finally reunited with their parents aboard the Ark, they realise that there's no signs of the high waters retreating just yet. Life at sea is not easy, food is bland, and stocks are running low.
Hey, I hear you.
An uneasy, fragile peace between carnivores and herbivores could break down at any minute.
That's Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park on an ark.
Jurassic Ark. Hey! God, we should be all ashamed of ourselves.
But yeah,
Come back next week.
And some other highlights including To Hell or Hibernia, Trace, St. John, which is a television series, Weekend, which is a television series as well, which is being produced by Donegal production company Slipway Films, and The Wee Lies, which is an animated television series being developed by Clare Animation Studio Magpie 6 Media. So, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in there.
Not mine,
a wide
unfortunately.
range. No, unfortunately,
next year, though. Next year.
Wait for Jay's sort of next big.
My
Pray
magnum
for Jay.
opus.
Well, that's one way of putting it.
Yes, it is.
Great to see more production over there, and we look forward to seeing them all premiere in Galway.
Yay! Which is coming in July, baby.
Soon.
We should also mention that Float Like a Butterfly is getting a release next weekend. Has been announced. It'll be out on May the 10th.
And I believe we're all very excited for it.
I'm particularly excited. I'm a huge Karen Winters fan. I can't wait to see it. Watch Snap. It's on Bolta. It's very, very good. She's a fine filmmaker.
All right, let's move on to the top 10. At number 10.
I wonder what's at number 1. Anyway.
Wait for it, Grace. Don't be so
What's
patient.
at number 10?
Probably
At number
a kids
10,
film.
it's 5 Feet Apart.
Is that a kids film?
No,
It's a
that's
sequel to 6 Feet Apart.
That's the one with Jughead in, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Is Jughead Cole Sprouse?
Yes, he is. Ben
Perfect.
from Friends.
Ben! Really?
He and
God,
his
Ben
brother
got
played
big.
Ben.
We're all
Aw.
going to die soon. Oh, God. How was this?
You know what's funny is when you're watching Friends and then you see him in it and you're like, oh my god, it's baby Jughead.
He's so hot. He's like 7.
Wow, Jay.
No, I don't say that.
What's Jughead?
Wow, Jay comes out as an
Riverdale.
incel and...
I know, right? This is what an episode.
Yeah, wow. This
There's
is
going to be
the...
so
Fortunately,
much work on this.
it's only Darren's going to fix this to make me seem less like a creep.
I will probably watch this at some stage, but I'm probably not going to pay to see it.
No.
At number 9, it's Little. Which
Pickle.
which has earned €240,000 at the Irish box office today.
You did see it
Doing quite
5
well.
times in fairness.
Well, I mean, I did. Somebody has to get
All
that.
of that money came from Darren.
At number 8, back in the top 10, which warms my cold, dead heart, having dropped out last week, Missing Link is back, baby. A total of €232,000 the Irish box office to date.
Word of mouth from Darren.
That's it exactly.
Or the Easter holidays.
Thanks, listeners.
It's having thank you very much, a monster weekend, so it did. It's also because the top 10 is perhaps a little bit weighted towards what's at number 1, which meant that you didn't have to, the bar for qualification wasn't that high. But so Missing Link is great. I really, really, really liked it, and wholeheartedly recommend it. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a Leica film, so the animation is stunning. It's got a wonderful sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of vibe to it. It maybe doesn't have the sort of like depth, nuance, and poetry of, say, Kobu and the Two Strings, but it works relatively well.
There's a lot to like about it.
Yeah, that's it exactly. All right, at number 7, Peppa Pig Festival of Fun.
Lads.
Film of the year.
It probably is. Peppa Pig is weird and great fun.
Okay.
I love Ronan coming out whole hog in support of it. At number 6, it's Wild Rose, which has done remarkably well. 341,000.
Can I say I've won a poster from the IFI signed by Jesse Buckley.
And you still haven't seen the film.
Tremendously excited about.
Yeah, and you
no,
still
I
haven't
seen the film. But I almost saw it.
But hey, they had a competition and you rose to the occasion. Did you go wild?
I'll go with that. I'll go with all those puns. Yeah, I did.
At number 5, if you see this, you won't have any regrettas.
Greta's great.
Greta is great.
It's nonsense, but my God, it's great
It's
fun.
You two had
balmy.
such fun with this.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see it.
It was one of the highlights of the film festival for me.
Well,
I think it was my third favourite film.
Wouldn't
of
go
the
that
festival.
far, but I did really enjoy it, I'd say.
All right.
It was one of those ones that, like, didn't particularly live long in the memory, but I had a weight of it while watching.
Yes, and it's just fun. It's enjoying itself.
Yeah, Hubert doing batshit stuff.
But Hubert doing Hubert. Like, I mean, it's very much just...
Dialed up to 11.
She's enjoying being, like, elevated to... Again, this is the thing where I've talked to actors who are like, it's great being a meme. And you can tell that, like, this entire movie is like, Hubert's like, watch me.
She's fabulous.
She's amazing.
GIF.
Yeah, I give good gifts.
She's great, and it's well worth seeing. Yeah. I mean, disposable enough, sure, but really great fun when you're watching.
Like, don't necessarily run out to see it as a must-see film of the year, but if you enjoy those sort of, like, schlocky, great fun 90s...
If there was half a dozen of these a year, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, that's it exactly. This is sort of like mid-budget thrillers that they don't make anymore.
Yeah.
At number 4, it's Shazam. Which is
Shazamant.
The other Captain Marvel film, which has earned $1 million at the Irish box office, which is pretty good.
Not
good
from
show.
my money, baby.
Yeah, for yeah.
Because I have definite time, or I don't care. Both of those things.
Mostly don't care.
But don't worry, Jay. This will get you caring.
Hit me with it.
At number 3,
what do you got?
Wonder Park.
No.
Yes.
Wait, what's Wonder Park again?
It's the director.
It's the directorless Paramount animated cross-brand.
Paramount's having a year.
Why is there no director?
Because he may or may not have sexually assaulted somebody.
Special Hugs? Oh god.
Yes.
Oh Jesus.
I got taken off film.
Special Hugs.
Wonder Park. Yeah. So it's basically it's.
But
it's
Darren pointed out, it would have been ditched if it wasn't set up for a TV
That's
show.
Exactly. It's a cross-media brand promotion thing. But it's earned €500,000 at the Irish box office.
But it's animation. Well, literally, no director, doesn't matter.
Is it
rudderless, you can just make
Alan Smithy, or is there no director credit?
There's no director credit.
What?
Yeah.
That's wild.
And it has one hell of a cast if you look at the credits as well, which is
Let's not remind them that they're in it, as I suspect they don't want to.
But hey, I mean, look, we all know that Paramount's future is incredibly rosy. We've had a number of interesting developments from this
until the end of time.
From this week.
A number of interesting developments.
The most obvious one being the release of the trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog this week, which is something to behold.
It's everybody's worst nightmare.
Jay was talking about how Greta didn't maybe stick with you a bit. I'm going to say Sonic is going to stick with me for quite a while.
I saw 45 seconds of the trailer first.
He has teeth.
I've seen all the memes.
It's lynching, terrifying.
It's
weird, and I never want to ever see anything about it.
It's grotesque and it's monstrous, and he's an alien for some reason.
Why did it take so long?
And has Jim Carrey, and it's...
Yeah.
The whole thing is a shit
He's
show.
got attitude.
It's the highest order.
He's Sonic, but with attitude. And he's furry, which is strange.
That is odd. That's very odd.
Yeah, texture, baby. He's got texture.
I hope to never see this film ever.
And
We're
because
tie you to a chair
this is a movie aimed at children,
no, it isn't.
The soundtrack to the trailer is
Coolio's
Gangster's Paradise, which is a movie that A, obviously means so much to children that are the target market for this, but B, also evokes a sense of speed and propulsion and momentum. This is something
if
you
this
have
makes
to see.
$20 at the cinema, I will eat my hat.
There is definitely someone in Paramount
Except
who's
for
like
Ireland, where, like, a
literally
mini
Nero fiddling while the studio burns, just like, what can we throw money at?
Well, it's
Coyle and Sonic the Hedgehog, but he's hairy. They're just going.
Spent 200 million on that shit show.
We made The Godfather. What can stop
Robert
us now?
Evans. But yeah, and also another announcement which I'm actually a little bit excited about from Paramount. I will admit, even though this is one of those things where it's probably not a good idea, but you're making Darren happy, so you've done something right. Apparently, Paramount have announced that they've got Crawl coming out, which is like The Shallows, but with Barry Pepper instead of Blake Lively, and alligators instead of sharks.
What a downgrade, though. From Blake Lively to Barry Pepper.
I'm going to respectfully argue the opposite on that.
I
don't really like Blake Lively.
I don't mind her either, but I really not good on Barry Pepper.
She keeps things lively, but I think
he is not salty
Pepper,
enough.
What has Baz done to you?
He exists.
I mean, he was the first sort of Scannain birthday celebration we had.
He was the second.
Was he?
Hang on, what?
Yeah, Ronan came up with a clever idea that we should mark it because our news often involves obituaries and the passing of like actors and directors and stuff. It's good to bring some levity.
A few weeks ago, we had that great episode where we googled everyone's birthday.
Yeah.
And Barry Pepper was in it?
Yeah,
Barry Pepper.
Forget about that Barry Pepper.
Yeah. You gave out to me loads for bringing up Barry Pepper.
I'm glad I'll continue it.
At number 2, starring Colin Farrell as Holt Farrier.
Stop. Just stop everything. Stop the
still
world.
Not true.
That's not true.
Who calls the CGI elephant Big D at every opportunity.
Really?
Yeah. Now, Ronan, the only way you can disprove this is by going to see the film.
I will trust you.
But it is the case. It's bizarre, and I kind of don't hate it.
No. Just move on.
Big
Stop
D.
Stop it, Darren.
Colin Farrell is a one-armed horse trainer called Holt Farrier.
No.
Oh,
Darren,
fine.
please.
You had me on board from that moment.
There's another Big D coming up in this show.
I have no idea what's number 1, but what? Hang on, what?
Yes, there is.
Thank you. You looked at me horrified for a minute there.
Boss D, as it were.
Oh shit, that was the one. Yeah.
Oh God, I want
Sorry,
to
I'm
see. What's
bad at
happening?
this.
What's happening?
At number 1, with the biggest opening of all time worldwide and record-breaking at the Irish box office, having $2.4 million in its opening weekend, including an extra $1 million from midnight previews and Thursday screenings.
And at least 30 quid from me.
And apparently having seen this 4 times, it is Avengers Endgame.
Is that the biggest Irish box office opening of all time as well?
I believe it might be as well.
Surely.
Yeah.
Grace, take it. Not the song, Grace. Talk. Give me your words.
Talk about Endgame.
Yeah, not too much though, because I haven't seen it.
I love Endgame. And all of the bits that I love about Endgame are the bits that I can't talk about because you haven't seen it
Right, we've
yet.
had enough from Grace. We haven't, of course, Grace. Talk as you see fit.
Well, I think I talked a lot about it last week. I have seen it again since then, but I will reiterate that I really love how slow and thoughtful a lot of this film is, especially if you watch it immediately after Infinity War, which of course I did the first time I saw it.
Yeah.
Infinity War is a film that just kind of, it's just relentless in pace. It just tears through everything that happens in it. And then after kind of an initial setup, shall we say, in Endgame, it gets very quiet, very slow moving, gives you a minute to sort of just sink into the world and sink into the characters and their reactions and everything that's been happening. And it's just wonderfully human. A lot of it feels so human, and there's so much emphasis on what it is to have a family and to have a place in the world and where you feel like you belong and what that says about your life and your legacy, and it just all becomes a bit too much. It's very emotional.
Yeah, every time I see that you've got to see it, like, it's all
crying.
Yeah, a lot of tears seem to be the kind of central part. Not Darren, obviously, because he's a monster.
No, I saw it a couple times, and it's very
fine.
moving when people in the audience cry a little bit. It's very touching.
But you're a robot,
No.
Darren.
Why?
Because he's a robot.
Because it's not emotional at all.
It is incredibly emotional.
I'm just trying to stir stuff up here.
Me
If
too.
you don't
I'm only
have a
I haven't
big-
seen it. I don't know.
AKA cheese biscuits.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously the emotion is relative. Some people
know,
feel
yeah.
there's emotion in other films that I don't think there's emotion in, so, you know.
Yeah, no, it's obviously entirely subjective.
I'm very
And
mature and didn't name any.
she was thinking of Christopher Nolan.
She was thinking of Interstellar specifically.
Which I cried in Interstellar.
See?
I cried, and
Would
I
you
This
stop?
is
cried
why.
every time I watched it.
Is there dust in your eye?
Endgame didn't even get close. Endgame
In
didn't make a
fairness,
single
I
McConaughey.
cried when I watched Interstellar. How many hours is left? How many?
How can you get so boring when you go into space? It's space.
Why are you
Jesus.
wasting Jessica Chastain?
What were
What are
you
you
gonna
talking
do
about,
with those
love?
embryos?
It's
What were you
already
going to
this
do with
stuff.
them?
If I hear the fucking Walt Whitman once more.
But we all
not
cried,
go
Darren.
gently.
Anyway,
We all
sorry,
cried,
segue.
Darren.
Do
I
not
think that-
go gently.
Anyway, after
Thank you, Michael Caine.
after the prolonged moment of intense emotion, then Endgame sort of kicks into high gear, and they have a plan, and things start to happen, and it kicks off one of my favorite aspects of the film, which I can't tell you about right now, but we will talk about it. That's wonderfully meta and reflective, and just the best way to watch it as a fan, because
Is it not safe to talk about it? It's been out a week.
Jay hasn't seen it.
Okay, but it's the most. I think. Okay.
No.
Hang on a second,
I'm not
Darren.
going to ruin it for you.
No,
Trample all over my feelings,
I'm
Darren.
not talking about like
Yes, you are.
like X happens to X. I'm talking in a general sense.
Darren,
Don't imply
Professor
that something
X.
happens to someone else in the film.
have
I didn't know the X-Men were in the film. Stop it, Darren. You monster.
When Deadpool shows up, the entire audience like breaks out into cheers.
Yeah.
Darren, you know
And
how
let's
to
not even get
suggest that
started
there are
on when the
plot
Fantastic
events in the
Four
film.
entered, like, screen
Yeah.
left.
Have you seen that viral
Yeah.
like tweet /
Yeah.
comment / Facebook thing where it's like, don't even tell me that you liked the film
that was
because
absurd.
that creates an
Absurd.
expectation.
But this is why people should not get what they want, because people are dicks.
Idiots.
Okay, but I got what I wanted with Endgame, so...
But you're
And that's
okay,
fine.
Grace. You're not
And
one of
no,
those people.
And I- no, but
also
I'm-
don't like spoilers.
I'm
But I
genuine.
also just avoided the internet a lot before I
Yeah.
saw it. And I
I'm-
certainly didn't read any reviews, because why would you do that before you've seen the film?
Well, you know,
Exactly.
particularly if you're going to see it anyway. But like, this is the thing: is that like I'm genuinely,
watching you, Darren.
I'm genuinely happy.
No, you're not.
I am. I'm
You're
genuinely.
such a liar. You don't care for
really,
people.
No, I'm really
No,
happy
I'm
that
joking.
this
I'm
makes people
joking.
happy. And again, there's something very affecting about sitting in a cinema and watching people get emotional and feeling that flow through
yeah.
the room. And it's kind of.
I
it
wish
is-
I could bottle the feeling from that first screening, because there were cheers.
Well, Grace,
there
do
were
I have a
screams,
bottle to sell
There
you?
were gasps.
Were there whoops?
Oh yeah.
I don't like a whoop. in
Only
the
one
cinema.
of which was mine. Oh, I can tell you the exact moment that I whooped
no,
at
don't.
after you see it.
I don't
And
like
if
a
you
whoop
whoop
in
at
the
the same
cinema.
moment-
Jay Coyle.
Oh my god. Sorry.
See, this is why I feel like we missed out by not having you there, because I think something would have escaped, and I would have been like, I noticed that.
I don't whoop.
That is
Grace.
on record forever.
I do not whoop.
Oh, you would have whooped.
Oh, that's such a...
Yes, you would have.
Are you whooping at me?
Especially when,
He's whooping right now. Look at him.
when everyone else
No,
has started
somebody else-
whooping, so you
somebody's
just
whooping
join
here.
in.
All right,
And
we'll
it's
see.
great.
We'll see, Grace. We'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll
I
talk
was-
about stuff after
Oh,
you
we
see
will.
it.
I was marginally less positive on this film.
Marginally.
Darren, you hated it.
I really did.
Did you actually hate
I
it?
came
Would
out-
you describe it as hate?
Like, it's not Justice League bad, it's not Aquaman bad, it's not Thor the Dark World bad.
How
although
dare you, quite frankly.
It's also like
I
I
have
was
a lot
like
of questions.
I was
Number
like-
one, how dare you?
I was agnostic about Infinity War. I actively dislike Endgame.
Okay.
And part of the reason is, and we've talked about this, is that like coming out of the film, the closest thing that there is to a hero in this movie is Tony Stark.
That's a wrong thing, because I don't like Tony Stark. So
Interesting, given what you were saying earlier about what we were saying about Iron Man 3.
Yes,
The
and
strength
it's like-
being that it recognizes
just
he's
that-
a complete asshole.
He is a complete asshole, and I recognize that, and that's why it's great. And it's weird because Endgame is populated by assholes, but doesn't realize that it's populated by assholes. And it
I feel differently about this.
I know that this is like we can go back and forth on that, but I think there is a push and pull around this, Darren. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Although you're
I
not.
think it
Oh, no,
probably, it's
Are
like
you
one of those
accepting
things.
this?
I'm upset I'm in the minority. I'm like you liking Under the Silver Lake. I'm the man on the fringe with the...
It's weird, isn't it? I
it's not
spent all my
really.
life there. It's a strange place.
It's
to
not
be.
really. It's just there's a very strong pushback against it, which is very strange.
What
Yeah,
I
but
think
it's one of the biggest films of all time.
Oh, it
so,
is,
you
but
know,
I mean, but at the same time, it's the biggest film of all time. It's massively successful. It's been incredibly well critically reviewed. And even when I'm negative about it, I'm always like,
No,
hey,
listen.
I'm happy that it makes you happy.
Well, just hang on a
but
second.
at the
That's
same
two
time-
different things, though.
at the
Right?
same-
Fans are arseholes.
I know.
Yeah.
Like that's that, and that's at everything. That, except when on air because they're all pure. But bar that,
Yeah.
they are the best fans in the world. But aside from that, fans are terrible and should never get what they want and should never be indulged in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree on that. And the baby infantilizing kind of nonsense about this film is no worse or no better than anything else that's
Yeah.
come before,
Yeah.
via Doctor Who, via Star Wars, via whatever. These basement dwelling shitheads ruin film. And ruin blockbusters, ruin everything by just being weird and stupid and men. Because they're always men.
Just
They're
men.
99.9% men.
All right.
And I hate them.
Amen.
That seems like
Hey.
a coda to transition
woman.
to talking about the
Woo!
the new releases.
I need a rest.
What do we got?
So we got Woman at War, which
Yes,
is
I'm so excited about this. Eco-terrorism, people.
Is this the Icelandic thing?
Oh, yeah.
Benedict Erkison, do you want to talk about it?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, cool, sorry.
I'm excited to see it.
Grace,
Because
you should see Kelly Reichardt's Night Moves.
I do, I need to see that.
Night Moves is good. It's
good,
probably
but
my least favourite Reichardt, but it's still really good.
It's really interesting about the kind of eco-terrorism.
It's a really interesting character portrait in that context.
I think you'd really like it.
Excellent.
Okay.
Anyway, I get excited.
Yeah,
about
this looks alright.
eco-terrorism.
I haven't seen it, but I'm aware of it.
Also out this week is Tolkien.
You're talking to me?
I saw a headline
Who's
today
Tolkien
saying
now? And the answer is Nicholas Hoult.
Nah.
the Tolkien film is better than all of the Hobbits. It's like, yeah.
That's
Lowest of bars.
Come on.
Okay,
If I sat in the
floor-
floor...
I like two Hobbit movies.
I like the second Hobbit
Would
movie.
you?
I don't like the third one.
I like
do
the
like
second
two
Hobbit.
Hobbit movies.
No.
They're
12 hours
obviously-
about
I'll go
Obviously,
TV.
nowhere near on a par with what came before, which are objective masterpieces. But
Steady, Grace. Steady.
I love the standing.
I'll go to bat for the second Hobbit film. If you cut the first 50 minutes out of the third and stuck it on the end, you'd have a really good film.
No.
No.
the third should not exist.
No, the third should not exist at all. But like the third
everything about it is a complete
But the
write-off.
third, like, there's a cliffhanger there that doesn't need to be
I saw the
there.
first one in 60
Rants,
FPS
screw you.
in
Me
the
too.
cinema, and I will never,
Splitting
and I'm
headache.
going to say it again, will never sit through anything with a fucking orc or whatever the shit
Oh,
is
it was-
ever again because
It
of
was insufferable.
It made me want to punch friends of mine when I came out of the cinema who brought me to see it.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to physically assault a friend of mine because of it.
And it was
And
clearly...
I almost never want to assault
It was
anyone.
clearly terrible within 10 minutes.
Yeah,
like,
and
Jesus
it
Christ,
looked
this
like a
is
TV
15
show
hours
from
long.
the 80s.
There's the bit with the video game where Legolas bounces like
The
he's
whole
Mario.
thing is a
My first-
shit house of a
One
film.
of my favourite like action
Hate
sequences
it
in
so
inverted
much.
commas is the moment where Legolas bounces like he's Mario in the 1980s
There are
video game.
so many awful things in it, though. Like, I mean, especially, and I like
there's
it. Okay, I
countless,
like
like-
it, but I'm not going to sit here and argue
I know you don't.
like they're not.
fairness, you know better.
bad. But,
If you're immersed in that world, there's a lot of nice stuff.
yeah, I mean, it's nice for nostalgic purposes, but
yeah.
at the same time, you're looking at it and you're like, it's like they looked at Lord of the Rings and went, everything here is amazing. Let's not do that again. Let's not think about our writing, our characters, and let's certainly not take some time to build some fucking sets. Like, let's
it's
just put
just-
in a green screen and
I was nearly in tears watching it. I
a
was like, how long is left?
fake villain.
I haven't had that
6
feeling since
hours.
then.
why
That's the last
didn't
time
we
since
just-
Strike Across Concrete. It's the last 2 times I've had a feeling of like, I have to stay in the cinema for how long more longer?
But also, why not
Listeners will
immediately
know that
kill off?
Interstellar came out between the two.
Why not
ETD.
immediately kill off like 7 of the dwarves? You don't need them. You need like 4 of them, and that's it.
I was not happy.
So
or
that would
dozy.
be me. I'd be like instantly, like something stands on 7 of the dwarves.
It was the
And
bad.
there.
film.
I quite like the best thing to come out of the Hobbit movie is I think is it Little White Lie's guide
My
to
anger.
the guide to the dwarves of the Hobbit, which is like the one who's always eating, the pretty
Me?
one, the one you go for if the pretty one turned you down.
Pretty one. I forgot about hot dwarves. That was madness. Madness.
The pretty one is played by an Irish actor. I
Yeah.
feel like we should acknowledge that.
No, we shouldn't.
Yes, we should, because he's
We
a
shouldn't
pain.
acknowledge anything about
Aidan
this
Turner, right?
absolute
Yes,
yes,
rag
Aidan
of a
Turner.
film.
Also, his on-screen
James
brother
Nesbitt.
is kind of a babe IRL.
George Best.
James Nesbitt
James
does it
Nesbitt-
for some people.
James
I'm not
Nesbitt
going to
dwarf.
judge them.
Stop
More
it,
than
Grace.
a lot of the dwarves in that film, in fairness.
There were a lot of
He's
people
on the
on
top
Tumblr
tier.
who were
No, no.
very into James
He was
Nesbitt.
James
What?
Nesbitt dwarf. That was his like
Sorry,
description.
are we hearing this? Grace, repeat
There
that.
are a lot of people on Tumblr who were really into James Nesbitt. I'm not
What
even
a
kidding.
world this is.
I
I'm really
know.
glad I missed Tumblr.
Get
I
a
know.
bit of Nesbitt in it.
Oh, God, go on to the next film, please.
Oh,
It's like,
oh,
the
don't worry. This will
characters
make you
right
feel
there.
much
I
better.
can't believe The Hobbit is at number 1.
Stop it, bro. Stop it.
How
Long
did
shot.
we even end up talking about this?
What's long shot?
Oh, you don't know what long shot is. I get to tell you what long
God.
shot is.
Why
You're
is
gonna enjoy
this new release like this?
Charlize Theron
Oh, this
on.
is, yeah.
plays. Okay, Charlize Theron plays a woman, a politician who is running for the most powerful office in the world, and to help her win, she hires Fred Florisk, who is played by Seth Rogen, is an
This one.
an unemployed journalist battered by his own misfortune, endeavouring to pursue his childhood crush and babysitter.
Is this
Sounds like
a Judd
Florian.
Apatow film?
It feels like it should
Does
be.
it co-star Sean Penn? I feel like it should co-star Sean Penn.
Andy
like all those
Serkis
bad
and
films do.
Alexander Skarsgård.
What the fuck
I'm
is
not
Andy
watching
Serkis
this.
in this for?
Because he makes a lot of bad
Or
films.
is this
in
like a
fairness.
throwback to when he was in 13 going on 30 and he was the magazine editor?
Yeah,
Who does he play?
I don't know.
He plays the digital gorilla. because that's all he can do now.
Seth Rogen.
Give me an Oscar.
Seth Rogen digitally, yeah.
He mocap Seth Rogen for an Oscar. Stop it, Andy. Stop being so He's so nakedly ambitious. You're not getting an Oscar. There will never be a mocap
That
Oscar,
would be
Andy.
amazing.
Get back to
if,
real
like,
acting.
Andy
He
Serkis
fucking
won an Oscar
deserved
for
an
that.
Oscar
not.
for that performance.
Seth
No, he
Rogen.
does not.
Yes, he did.
No.
Yes,
I'd
he
vote
did.
for him.
Stop
I'm
mocapping.
gonna
It's
fight
not
you
real
on this.
acting. It's rolling around on the ground.
Oh,
Now I've said it. I've said it now.
Whoa.
It's rolling around with lights attached to you.
Jay?
I could do it tomorrow. Nonsense. He does not deserve
Cut
an Oscar.
to
Jay.
Jay
Oh,
trying to do
wow.
it tomorrow.
There's a hot take.
Ardmore Studios, we have a volunteer. If anyone from Ardmore Studios is listening and would like to
Get to the next film. For the love of God.
Hotel Mumbai,
I don't know.
That's
This
a downer.
That's the
That's
one. The
hostage situation, at
murder
the
of people,
Taj
yeah,
Hotel,
this-
terrorist attack in Mumbai.
Yeah, that's.
Starring Armie Hammer, Jason Isaacs.
This
and
is
Dev
too
Why is
Western
Armie
and
Hammer
too
in
soon
this?
for this because he's the white American that we care for. So I
Yeah.
guess I don't want to see this. This too soon for something like that.
Yeah.
I know they say these things too soon, but it's too soon. Stop. That is dreadfully awful.
We're going to kill him.
Yeah, stop.
And
Armie.
What's
now,
up?
Now we really
Oh,
have
for
the
the
film
love
of
of
the
God.
week.
now we have what might be the film of the week.
Oh, I don't doubt it is.
In
Whatever it
every
is.
sense, the film of the week, considering I've not seen any of the other new releases or in the top 10.
And most of them sound terrible.
I
But
deci-
go on.
we decided that Ronan was neglecting his duties on this podcast
Yeah,
as like
it's-
expert in
It's come up
canine
many
related cinemas.
times when a dog-related film has been in the new releases or top 10 when y'all turn to me as if I'm gonna have seen this. So
Yes.
for once we decided that I'm gonna have seen this. I'll tell you two things about A Dog's Journey, crucially. Number one, I cried. Number two, it's rubbish. But those things don't necessarily have to be mutually
That's true.
exclusive. Because literally, there is a dog death, and I can't not cry.
No.
But what's
You
really
lost
weird
me.
about this film, and I had this is a sequel to A Dog's Purpose, and I didn't know anything about it. I went in not knowing anything because I didn't want to know anything. Cause
How would you know the
Spoilers.
backstory?
It doesn't seem to matter
Yeah, I
I-
feel like we picked it up rather
Yeah,
well.
okay.
because there are, I think, 4 dog deaths in this film.
4.
Jesus.
That's a lot.
It's a story
It's
with
like 4 John
It's a
Wicks.
bloodbath.
It's about
it's a
110 minutes, maybe.
It's even. I think it's
It's
about,
every
yeah.
20 minutes, 25 minutes. A
The
dog
plot,
death.
which
Good
I
Lord.
didn't realise, is that the dog is reincarnated through time to
Oh
keep
my
minding this
God.
family across the generations.
That's the dog's purpose.
That
and
actually
the
doesn't
dog's
sound
journey.
bad as a pitch.
It should,
Be better.
because it is.
Yeah.
Literally for the first 20 minutes, I was like, this is kind of sweet and nice. So you have...
Possibly the greatest setup and payoff in cinema history. I don't want to oversell it or anything like that.
I think it's absolutely fair to say that's the case.
Yeah. There's a moment where early in the film, Dennis Quaid, who was the hero of a
Dennis
dog,
Quaid, the
of a-
yellow pack. Literally any actor you've heard
Harrison
of the last
Ford.
10 Yeah.
of a dog's purpose, in that like the dog saved his life in a dog's purpose, and now it's like living in retirement.
Did you see A Dog's Purpose?
I did not.
Okay.
But there's a moment early on where he's getting old and the dog's getting old, and the dog brings over a deflated American football, and he's like, "Do you want to do this one last time?"
You're
No.
Hang on, the dog can talk?
No.
No, the dog narrates, though.
The dog narrates. So
How
Dennis
does the
Quaid.
dog narrate?
What's the same thing? You can
No, he can't talk to he can't talk to the humans, but he narrates to us.
Yeah.
Oh, for the love of
Yeah,
Christ.
to the children of the audience, who I should say lapped this up. They
Yeah.
loved it.
There were
Lap
sobs.
this up,
Like, I mean,
right?
and not just Ronan. Like, I mean, there were people like crying and
Not
laughing.
just
Not
Ronan.
like morons like Ronan not laughing at anything.
No, like crying, sobbing. Like crying, actually sobbing at the end.
Ronan
I think
literally laughed at anything,
You
but none of it.
described the closing scene as, I think,
Oh.
Terrence Malick's Lassie.
Yeah, it is. It's very much Terrence Malick's Lassie. It ends in a...
I'm in.
It's the final scene is beyond bizarre. It's very weird. But you
But strangely moving. Like,
So my whole thing is the opening 20 minutes, they're really sort of emotionally crude and sort of all over the place. The characterization is very threadbare. You've got Dennis Quaid with his beloved old dog, his
Boss dog.
Come with me, boss dog.
there's a lot you don't know about that dog.
His beloved grandchild, whose father, his adopted son, I think, because it's his wife's biological son,
Yeah.
but he's not actually the biological father. Anyway, he has died in a possibly a
accident.
thing that happened in the previous film. His not wife, because they weren't married, is a terrible mother, and the film makes no
And the film is
she's a
very,
terrible mother. She has no nuance. She's not suffering, through having lost her partner and having to raise a child alone in
and
her
the expectations
not even
heaped upon
parents-in-law's
her,
house.
yeah.
She's just a terrible person
And
because she's confused in the situation, which is completely unfair. Anyway, despite that, there's this nice thing about 20 minutes of,
There's a moment where, like, her daughter comes home and is like, well, this boy assaulted me, and the mother's response is, well, did you lead him on?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the
God.
level of characterization we're dealing with.
The film is, not 10.
It
People
has-
are great
yeah.
or awful.
Yeah.
But the opening 20 minutes has this nice thing with Dennis Quaid and the dog. It's actually quite moving. They're both old. It's this thing about aging and getting old and having lived with a dog your whole life
I bet
and
the
seeing
dog
it
is
slowly
pure,
fade
though.
away.
I can understand that.
No, it absolutely is, and it's good canine acting. And then the dog dies very early on.
Oh, for
and
God's sake.
I got weepy because I can't not, because I've been through that. And I think
Well,
anyone
who
who's
could
been
look
through
at a
that,
dog dying and
it's
not
that
weep?
thing
Yeah,
that
I was
as
devastated.
soon as you have
Yeah,
that kind of thing, you have that emotional connection
Yeah, yeah.
immediately. You're like, I know how that feels. Oh God, here it comes.
Yeah.
And then the film proceeds to do that like 4 times, and it just keeps killing off dogs, keeps doing it to the point where it no longer means anything.
personal
Bloody
favorite
alert,
is
John Wick.
My personal favorite is
North
the
America.
dog that exists so that the character can wander through a convenience store, have a 30-second encounter with this dog, and then the dog wanders off into the forest to die alone.
It's 4 weird TV
What?
episodes,
Ah, lad,
barely
stop.
stitched
Would
together.
you
It's
They
like
keep
touched by an
reincarnating
angel,
through time.
but the angel is a dog.
The dog wakes up and is like, how will I find my owner this time? And goes running around and then leaps at them and sees them walking through the streets of New York. It is very badly written.
It's
Incredibly convenient,
atrociously
that kind of
terribly
thing.
written, and the performances aren't necessarily great. And the
I feel this is a disproportionate amount of time spent on a bad film, I will say that.
Yes.
yeah, but
It is dreadful.
despite giving it the same rating as Ronan, which is 2 stars, the earnestness almost kind of got there for me to a certain extent.
I really liked the first 20 minutes. And then after that, I thought it was utter nonsense. But the last 10 minutes are so wildly weird. It so commits to the idea of dog reincarnation. And Dennis Quaid by this stage is caked in old age makeup.
It's amazing.
Turns up
He's
with his
already not young, like.
yes.
Oh no! I
Turns up with his waistband higher than his nipples. And is literally like, how are all you kids doing? It's cracked.
It's great.
I really kind of want to see this.
What the first 20 minutes and the last 10 minutes? It's a masterpiece.
It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on YouTube.
But
There's an
like,
hour
I
in
think I'm gonna
between.
watch
Yeah.
this.
But like, no, there are actors who will tell you that they can't act under prosthetics, and Dennis Quaid would respond, "You're not trying hard enough."
Oh my god.
Again, there's a moment where he summons the dog outside after telling the owner, "There's a lot you don't know about this dog." And also Boss Dog. He calls the dog Boss
Weird
Dog.
name for a dog. Come on, boss
That's,
dog.
I'm either in or out. I'm not sure. This is both terrible and
Watch the
amazing.
last 10 minutes.
Okay.
The last 10 minutes are actually extraordinary. That final shot,
Astonishing.
it genuinely is Terrence Malick style, going through wheat fields, but with a dog.
Oh yeah.
It's that narration from Gladiator. It's like if you find yourself
But
in
it's a
fields
dog's
of gold.
How's that dog's narration, though? Does not anybody want to take a...
It's
that
just
again,
like...
Just inside the dog's head. So the dog's,
It's like,
the dog's
I was
like,
born in a blah, 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 and then I found myself dying, and oh my god, what's
Oh,
happening?
food!
Now I'm a puppy
There's
again.
food!
I
You know,
hate
this-
that there's always 6 nipples, but there are 7 puppies. It's crude and weird and strange.
You know what
And
this
it's
just
meant,
also I
makes
can
me...
smell
it's meant
cancer
for
now.
kids. It's meant to
Yeah.
explain the plot to kids,
Yeah.
essentially.
You know what this just makes me think of? You know that joke about the Boston Terrier? What does it say?
No.
Bog bog.
Ah, yes.
Why didn't they
Very
do...
good. Very
Why
good.
didn't
Very
they
good.
do a dog doing an accent
Boston
based on what
accent.
And Matt
breed
Damon,
it was?
Boston Terrier, everyone.
Yeah.
The have a dog.
But it is. It's very much like a look who's
Very
talking,
good.
but with a
Yeah.
dog.
I like
Yes,
that.
yeah,
is the
absolutely.
extent of it. It's like
And it almost never works.
And
And I just think it's really weird that it keeps killing the dog. It keeps killing the dog. But it creates this sense, which I think is kind of weird to tell to a child, that don't worry, even if your dog dies, it
You
will
get a
be back in
replacement.
another body in about 20 years.
You'll
And
get a
Dennis Quaid
replacement.
will be like, boss dog. Very strange.
I'm either never going to watch this or I'm going to immediately watch this. I'm not sure yet.
there's
Okay, I'm going to
middle
suggest
ground.
that you probably don't and watch
Yeah,
something
don't
a little
watch
bit
it.
more
I think-
enriching
do
for
not
your
watch
mind.
Maybe. But Boss Dog, though.
Boss.
I'm kind of in. I want to see the Dennis Quaid trousers.
Genuinely,
dog.
Dennis Quaid trousers are
I want to see the Dennis Quaid trousers.
Okay.
because he hunches his shoulders and he moves his little finger. It's
And a
amazing.
shout out
Oscar,
to,
Oscar, are we talking Oscar?
If there was any
It's
justice in
actually
the world.
a really good weird performance. But a shout out to Mark
it's a good
Hellenberger,
weird
who's
Oscar.
acting beside
Mark
him,
Hellenberger.
who is just full on like turning up for work and doing a really good job and actually performing a character, whereas Dennis Quaid is like, this is a cartoon.
Boss
I
dog.
can't believe this is what I've been reduced to.
I don't know what to say about this.
All right.
This is
Okay,
a remarkable
let's
double
move
bill.
on.
I cannot believe I cried at this film.
It's okay.
And listeners, he did.
I've cried at The Bodyguard.
The Bodyguard's worth crying
So,
over, though.
come on.
That should be cried at.
The Bodyguard's great.
Yeah.
Also out this week, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, which is streaming on Sky
Yeah.
Movies, but available
Zefron,
on...
I think, has gotten some kind of a chin implant. Can we investigate this?
What?
Oh, wow.
It's weird.
A chin plant.
A chin.
Yeah.
Ew.
Chin plants.
Ooh, I said
You've never had a chin plant? I mean, come
concept.
The
on.
image.
But I
The
mean, like,
image. It's gross.
It is.
Is it like a Ben Affleck style, kind of like
It's gotten all pointy.
face ass?
And I'm
Is
like,
it-
what have you done to your face? Your objectively perfect face.
Is it
Zach,
this thing where you like...
WTF.
Is it for the
Where
film,
people
though?
take fat
Yeah.
out of your ass and inject it into things, except they've actually just taken the ass and given them a cleft. Is that the...
I've never... What?
Okay.
I heard a story about something, but I'm not going to bring it up on the podcast earlier. Anyway,
Well then.
it's not suitable for the podcast. But this really doesn't interest me in any way.
It's not great. I've
It
seen
doesn't
this,
look
yeah.
fun.
It interests me.
It feels
because
like a
Zefron,
2
but that's
decades
it.
too late
That's
kind
it.
of
That's
film.
it exactly. It's very much
I'm
again.
also curious about what way this story could be told in any
From the
era,
victim's
but
perspective.
especially
Well,
not
no,
this
no,
one.
no. But from like
what
the
they say,
from the
The
girlfriend,
handsome guys.
from the girlfriend of the serial killer's perspective, which isn't like, to be fair to it, an interesting.
That could have been an interesting angle in terms of gaslighting and psychological manipulation
It
and
is-
so on. But somehow I doubt that's the road that
Yeah,
they've gone down.
can't imagine it working.
The issue with it is primarily, as Jay pointed out, the fact that like Bundy has cast such a large shadow over pop culture that like you've seen this movie inspired by the events involving Ted
Also,
Bundy, even if it's not a Ted Bundy film.
should be pointed out as well that
You've seen
in that
Zodiac, you've
context,
seen
but in the context of that, like older listeners like people like me will remember that Mark Harmon played Ted Bundy about 20 odd years ago, and Mark Harmon in the 80s was the kind of go-to TV heartthrob in the way that not necessarily the same as Efron, but in a kind of TV movie sense, he was the handsome go-to guy, and like that's the time when you did this.
Oh, yeah,
and,
no, no,
and
like-
you look back and go, "Geez, a bit
You
quaint,
did
isn't
like
it?" But, you know, you did
like a
the-
Channel 5 movie of the
Yeah,
week
yeah,
kind
exactly
of thing.
that.
Yeah.
And that was exactly what it was, like.
Yeah.
But even
Yeah.
the 80s and 90s serial killer explosion, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, Silence of the
the
Lambs,
Brian
Copycat,
Denny, the clown
Seven.
killer,
John Wayne Gacy
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, and it feels like it's
Catch Killer.
arrived late to its own party.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
like the
Very
issue is,
late, though.
The issue is that all the stuff that it does, while inspired by true events and inherently absurd, feels tired because you've seen it filtered through so many times. There are some marginally interesting ideas in there, in particular the fixation on Bundy as an all-American type. This idea of like the idea that was he creating this like idealized family with this girlfriend single mother and her child in order to like provide camouflage, or was it a reflection of like the violence within patriarchal society and stuff like that?
Also, he was a Republican, which I hope
Yeah,
that.
it
I
was
hope
called-
you know he was. He joined
He
the
was.
Republican
No, he
Party.
genuinely
The
He was an
real
upper-comer.
evil.
No,
he was an
he
upper-comer in the
was.
Republican Party. Like he,
on campus, he was
yeah,
very
he was
active.
like-
I know, I'm
involved.
just this is just a very you
like-
thing to bring up.
I'm pretty sure all serial killers are Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
I'm almost certain of it.
Yeah.
But
I would be less certain, but anyway, that's
I wouldn't, because they're all bastards. But anyway.
okay. But yeah, no, it has this sort of it plays with this idea, and like this idea he's bigger than Disneyland, or this sort of all shucksness, like, well, how'd you get so smart? I got it from my mother. You did, didn't you? And this sort of like really wholesome image that he projects, and the idea of like connecting that to the crimes and violence that he commits,
Yeah.
which is vaguely interesting. The only issue is the script is about as subtle as a bag of sledgehammers hurled on top of another bag of
Did he-
sledgehammers. There's a moment where he rings up the house. His girlfriend's work colleague answers and he says, "You're killing her, you know that?" And it's like, well, I get what you're trying to say, but there are people he has actually killed. So maybe this isn't the right line to emphasize. And then later on, that same coworker has an argument with Bundy's girlfriend, and he's like, or it's Klepfer is her name, and he has an argument with her, and he's like, "He's killing you, and you're letting him." And it's like,
Stop.
yeah, just,
I'm going to hit
You're
you with a
killing
baseball
me.
bat in the
Yeah.
face
Yeah.
while we kill you literally and figuratively.
yeah, it just doesn't work,
Didn't
which is
the
a
same
shame because
director make the TV
He did the
documentary,
Bundy-
which
the
is
Bundy tapes.
odd to,
Oh, really?
in a
Yeah.
kind of
The
Hanukkah
companion
style
sort
kind
of
of
piece.
weirdness, like that
Very
he made the
obsessed.
documentary on Netflix and then
Yeah.
made
And then
the
this, which ended up on
narrative.
Sky.
Yeah. So
the
it
two
has that
competing streaming
weirdly
services.
strange kind of feeling that, and how objective can you be, or how
Yeah.
about a film can you be after making a documentary on something?
Is this guy's house full of Bundy books?
I would suspect so.
But it's to be
Trips
fair, this
over
is
millions of pictures of
Berlinger,
Bundy spill out of his
who's
throat.
he's a documentary
just
filmmaker,
hope
Oscar nominee and stuff like that.
Somebody else.
He is an Oscar nominee, but
And famously, his last major narrative film was Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows.
what was his documentary though? He's made a document. It's not very good. I've seen it.
What is it? The Bundy tapes on Netflix?
The
or
Bundy
something?
Tapes on Netflix is the documentary.
He made another documentary, and I'm going to look it up while you continue talking.
Okay, but yeah, so
Because I don't want to hold everybody up here.
But the thing
That's
with like extremely wicked, shocking, evil, and violent, and it's interesting that Jay brings
an
up
awful title.
but Jay
It's
brings
an
up
awful title.
the documentary as a concept, and it's telling that like previously with a film like this and a documentary released together, the documentary would feel like a supplemental feature. It's perhaps reflective of the modern true crime landscape that like the feature-length movie starring Zac Efron and Lily Collins feels like the supplement to the Netflix true crime series. And it's interesting how much that sort of suggests that like the serial killer drama or the serial killer narrative has moved on to the point where like, first of all, we're not really that interested in them as narrative sort of features anymore, but also how
Only in podcast form.
but that's it exactly. How the angle we take on them is true crime, documentary, and podcast. That's how we prefer to consume them. Almost like Halloween. But I'm going to let Jay jump in there.
I knew Berlinger's name from somewhere, and he made the Paradise Lost documentary about the West Memphis Tree.
Okay, that's supposed to be quite good.
It's not bad. I've seen it. I think there's two competing documentaries about the same thing, so I can't remember exactly. I think the one I saw was at Diff about 6 years ago. It's not bad. A little incomplete, I think, if I remember correctly. It just felt it was it narrowed down the focus a little too much for my liking, in the sense it was pushing you towards a conclusion rather than letting the story unfold. If that's the one I've seen, so I'd have to double check it. But that kind of swamping of story in terms of documentarian and narrative filmmaker within a couple of years of same things.
Not within a couple of years,
Within
like
the
within
year.
months.
I'm not
Like
a fan of that.
this premiered
I
at the
don't know
film
how
festival.
you could make that and do anything justice.
Well, I mean,
to some degree.
there's this weird tension in there
Yeah.
where like the film tries to mine this idea of Klepfer being oblivious to her boyfriend's sort of serial killer antics, but by not showing them, to pick an example. But the audience knows it's Ted Bundy. So you have this weird tension where the film is not showing you any of the horrific stuff that he's done or the consequences of it, despite the fact that you already know it. And it kind of undercuts this thing that it's trying to do. It doesn't really work, which is a shame because there's a lot there to like. Efron is surprisingly convincing as a
I'm
cold,
not surprised.
dead-eyed
He's
killer.
a
That
good
is
actor.
not surprising at all.
Yeah, I think he's a fine
Zephron
actor.
is very good.
Yeah, I'd agree.
He is.
And,
He's underrated.
but this doesn't really interest me, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm probably going to pass.
And finally, the big release of the week is The Curse of Little Aronia.
No, it's not.
La Aronia.
Yep.
That's not a big release.
The Weeping Woman.
I
It's
really
part of the
love-
Conjuring verse.
I really love this urban legend, though. I think it's a great urban legend.
It's a woman who murders her kids
Let me
and
sigh
stalks children.
dreadfully while you talk about this.
And dogs?
And stalks. No, not dogs.
Ah.
Stalks.
Good God. Couldn't take any more dog deaths this week.
A dog died in line of duty. It was awful.
Spoilers.
It was awful.
Oh.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, the thing with The Curse of Little Aronia, it's relatively competently made, which is kind of, it's got that clean Conjuring sort of sheen to them. It hits all the beats you're expected to. It's heavily influenced by 70s cinema. It's got good use of darkness and light. It provides sort of jump scares, ironically, where you expect them to be to a certain extent, but with enough sort of like technique and craft that it kind of works. Bad news is that it comes in with a number of built-in failures. The most obvious being the fact that it is the first Conjuring universe film to focus primarily on something that is not like European or American in nature. I know The Nun went to Eastern Europe, but The Curse of Little Aronia, the Weeping Woman,
La Aronia.
but The Curse of the Weeping Woman takes place in sort of, it's a Mexican folktale.
Oh, God.
But the film decides to focus on this from the perspective of a white woman played by Linda Cardellini. Now, her husband, who is absent, is of Mexican extraction, and so her children are also of Mexican extraction as well. But there's something vaguely uncomfortable in the idea of the film as the story of a Mexican demon haunting a white woman in Los Angeles. And in particular, and again, this is something that is, like, there's absolutely no malice of forethought here. I don't think it's consciously doing any of this. But because the film is very consciously emulating a certain style of 70s horror film, director Michael Chavez, who's very, very good, his work here is very, very good, but there's this repeated emphasis on things like boundary crossing. So this idea of doors being blown open, the invasion of the family home, windows being pushed open, lines being crossed, thresholds being passed, that kind of makes it a home invasion thriller as well, which in the current context maybe
worrying.
Feels like it's a little uncomfortable and troubling. It also, and again, this is not a result of any malice of forethought or anything like that, but is a result, I think, of this kind of meta cinema of homage that we live in at the moment, where you can tell that, like so many of the Conjuring films, this is a movie that is heavily inspired by movies like The Exorcist, draws heavily from 70s cinema, and in particular, this is set in 1973. I think the two Conjuring movies are as well. But the thing about that which makes it uncomfortable is that its fears and anxieties are copied over without any real consideration from those 70s horror movies. So you have a movie that's released in 2019 where its big fears are working mothers, single mothers, latchkey kids, families with only one parent at home.
Those great 21st century worries.
Yeah, those sort of anxieties, which were baked into like the idea that you had in the 70s with the disintegration, the idea of the conventional nuclear family, but which in 2019, in the era of films like The Fast and the Furious, feel like they're maybe a little reactionary to a certain extent, which is a shame. And again, I think that's just a case of like copying and applying a template without any real thought being put into it, which is a shame. That said, the movie does feature possibly one of my favorite characters of the year so far. Raymond Cruz's warrior / poet, priest / shaman, filling the role of like the traditional exorcist, the expert who's brought in to deal with the demon, but played in like the most amazing Raymond Cruz style, which is complete and utter deadpan. This is a man who understands that you don't overplay it because you'll kill a scene, and in particular this balance of humor that has to exist, where you've got like a horror movie but you want a few laughs in there. There's a moment where, and I shit you not, the character has to improvise while the creature is attacking somebody in a pool. So he lays his hand down on the water, says a prayer backwards, and the monster retreats scared. Now, any other movie would treat this as like a ha ha ha, this is hilarious, but Raymond Cruz utters completely deadpan. Your pool is now filled with holy water. And then turns to walk back towards the house. It's kind of amazing because it's so deadpan, so entirely like serious and sort of stiff, that it kind of circles back around to being funny without breaking the movie's sort of sense of style. There's a moment where he's like, where the woman's like, you used my son as bait. And he's like, no, I used all of you as bait. And it works. I want this guy to get a spin-off.
I'm not watching this.
I want
Don't talk to me or my son ever again.
I want Raymond Cruz to get his own little Conjuring franchise where he.
But he will, won't he? Because like everybody else gets one.
Well, we hope he will. I'd much rather have him than the Warrens. By the way, one of the Warrens passed away, I think, this week as well.
What do you mean?
The Warrens, the couple who inspired the Conjuring,
I thought you meant the actors.
artists. Oh no!
I thought Vera Farmiga was in trouble.
No.
Oh God, no! I don't care about them.
All right. So yeah,
I never heard those guys.
But I would much rather have a sort of a Raymond Cruz Exorcist movie than the one featuring the Warrens.
Fair enough.
All right, so that about wraps it up. But people are a bit more Ronan, a bit more Grace, a bit more Jay in their lives. Where can they find you guys?
About 4 days.
What year is it?
I'm like, how is it still light outside?
Madness.
Yeah. Anyway, you can find me on Letterboxd and or Twitter at Pixie Grace.
All of the above at Darren Ronan.
At J. Coyle on Twitter.
You can follow me at Darren_Mooney. I also host another podcast called The 250, where this week, myself and Andrew, and along with Tony Black from the UK, an international guest, will be covering Avengers Endgame.
What's that?
It's a low-budget indie film. Have you seen the TV show The Leftovers? Have you seen the TV show Star Trek The Next Generation? No. Have you seen Doctor Who?
Struggle to find anything I've ever seen.
Stephen Moffat's Doctor Who.
He hasn't seen anything. He never watches TV.
I can't do TV.
It's like those things, but put together in a stew.
I don't know what they are.
It's a fantastic. It'll be a new experience for you. I'll loan you the DVD.
Cannot wait to see it. Tune in 6 years' time.
All right.
Yay.
Take it easy, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Laters.